Seeing his ex-wife as a rich bride in an elite restaurant, the guard froze on the spot from shock. In the heart of the city, among the sights, luxurious flower beds and monuments, there was a prestigious and very expensive hotel. The top of its roof was visible from anywhere in the city, and from the observation deck you could see everything you wished. The surrounding area was always bustling with life. The elite of society settled inside the hotel, and those who did not dream of getting inside took photos of the luxurious facade side. Some just fantasized about getting at least a glimpse inside, and some were disdainful. The rich people there, they think they're aristocrats, some grumbled. Sven had been looking for a new job for a long time. Although he was young, he had a lot of experience in the hotel business. Not without problems, but he was hired at the same hotel as a doorman. Sven was intrigued. Like the rest of the townspeople, he had heard all sorts of rumors and suspicions. And so came his first day of work. Actually, it wasn't exactly his first day of work. Sven had been put on probation under the supervision of a more experienced employee, but his nerves were jittery, as if he was not at work, but at an audience with the president of the country. Donning his uniform, Sven stood at his post. He felt incredibly energized. He wanted to prove himself as soon as possible as an usher. Sven smiled broadly and asked his colleague, what time does the flow of people usually start? His colleague turned out to be a young man named Dan. Like Sven, Dan was a doorman, but he would be leaving that position very soon, having decided to quit. He had been put as Sven's partner to train him. The look on Dan's face was bored and, to put it bluntly, dejected. He shrugged. Whenever Dan muttered. Sven frowned. Dan looked too relaxed. Sure, it was one of his last days on the job. However, the key word here was not last but working. A doorman has no right to be moody. He should be smiling, charming, helpful. And Dan? Dan was more like a security guard at a chain grocery shop in a dormitory neighborhood, not a doorman at a high-end expensive hotel. While the two of them were alone, Sven decided to ask, "What are you doing?" What Dan asked in surprise, leaning against the door. "Why should I be happy? I can't wait to get out of here," he mumbled back. Sven nodded understandingly, though he didn't really understand Dan at all. He couldn't understand how anyone could want to quit. Apart from the decent pay, this place was a dream come true in itself. When he went for the interview, he rather just wanted to be inside and didn't even expect to be accepted. He knew for sure that if he wasn't going to be fired, he wasn't going to leave. After some thought, he asked, "Can I ask you a question?" "Try," Dan said. "Why did you quit?" "Well, how can I put it? There are several reasons," Dan stretched out. Sven raised his eyebrows high in anticipation, looking at his colleague. Not wanting to ask clarifying questions, he waited for Dan to continue his thought. But Dan just remained silent. Apparently he didn't want to talk, but Sven was still curious. Without fear of sounding tactless, he asked, "So what are the reasons?" "It's not a good place. Not a good place," Dan muttered. "Why are you surprised?" "I'm not surprised. More like confused." "What do you mean?" "That's what I mean. It's a tough place to work. The staff is a snake's tangle." Sven got a little nervous. "How does it manifest itself?" "You'll find out for yourself," Dan said. "Tell me," Sven asked. Dan made a disgruntled face, but didn't have time to answer. One of the hotel guests, a young and very pretty girl, appeared, smiled at the doorman, and asked them where they could go nearby. Sven hurried to fulfill his work duty. He told her where to go and what to see. When she was out of sight, Sven repeated his question. "What's wrong with this place? Tell me. I've got work to do here." "There's nothing to tell," Dan said. "The people here are fake. And I don't mean the visitors, I mean the employees, you know." "Honestly, not so much. Gossip, intrigue, backstabbing. There's a lot going on here. You know, when you said it wasn't a good place, I was thinking of something else," Sven admitted. Dan laughed merrily. "What did you expect to hear?" That I'd tell you about the hotel being built in a graveyard. Sven sneered. Well, sort of. That's bollocks. I've heard all sorts of stories about it being a cursed place and blah, blah, blah. You know what the truth is? There's some really bad people working here. That's the secret. Sven made a neat point. But you've worked here too. I did. But as soon as I realized that the employees here were scheming, I quit. How long did you work here? Not long. You couldn't say Sven was scared, but he was definitely a bit tense. So you had an argument with someone? Yeah. Is that why you decided to quit? Well, you could say that. Who? Dan gave Sven a disgruntled look and turned away. Sven realized that his mentor was in no hurry to share his secrets and decided to leave him alone. They stood in silence for about 10 minutes, and at the end of that time Sven couldn't stand it any longer. I take it you don't want to talk about the reasons for your conflicts, but to ask in a more generalized way, look, you're here to mentor me, aren't you? So? Dan muttered. Well, to mentor me, to give me advice. But more to the point, please tell me more about the local team. Is everyone here a real gossiping savage? It's a big group. Surely there are some normal people. Normal, he repeated, rubbing his hands together thoughtfully. Well, maybe there are, but what does it matter? There's no need to be afraid of them. Then tell me, who should be feared? Who should be avoided? Who should not be contacted at all? Dan squinted. Dania, a lot of people. Like one of the waitresses at the restaurant, she's a bitch. Her name's Zoe. She's the only one here with that name. Don't even look in her direction. And she's like, ugh, I can't even remember her. What is she capable of? But you don't want to know. Sven frowned. There were more questions and fewer answers. After a moment's thought, he asked, Is that all? No, I told you maybe it just didn't work out for me. You'll be fine. So you should avoid only the waitress. Avoid the security chief in the first place. He's a real SAR. Sven smiled. Thanks for the warning. You think I'm joking? I'm dead serious. Never make eye contact with him. And if possible, don't talk to him at all. Pretend you don't exist. Is it that serious? You have no idea how serious. I'm wrong about some things, but not this. Everyone's really scared of him. Sven's day at work was going well. His partner and mentor wasn't the most talkative person, but he was happy with him. Although Dan didn't say anything particularly interesting or important, Sven tried to listen to avoid Zoe and the security chief. The advice was interesting, but a little odd. Sven decided it was worth following, though he never quite understood why. The first day came to an end, followed by the second, third, and even the fifth. Slowly but surely Sven joined the local team, trying to seem like a nice and good-natured guy. And although it was too early to judge, Dan seemed more and more strange to Sven with each new day. Who did he have a fight with around here? Everyone who got in his way seemed to be very nice, pleasant people. Sven had almost finally come to the conclusion that the problem was Dan himself. But he still wondered why he had singled out two particular people. So Sven decided to find out more about it. Before the start of the shift, the newcomer accidentally met one of the representatives of the team, whom he had not seen before. It was a rather elderly woman who worked as a maid. Seeing her friendly look, Sven decided to have a little chat with her. Hello, I'm new here. My name is Sven. She smiled at him and introduced herself. Hello. You're the new doorman. It's good to have you here. That Dan, you know. My name is Samantha. Nice to meet you, Samantha. Sven frowned. What's wrong with Dan? Can't communicate with him? He's not much of a talker, but he doesn't seem to be a bad person. You don't know him very well, Samantha explained persuasively. He's a young guy, but he acts like a market girl. You mean he's a gossip? Haven't you noticed? I can't believe he hasn't told you any gossip. He really hasn't. Although, to be honest, I did ask him to tell me a few things. Samantha eyed the newcomer incredulously. And what? He didn't share anything with you at all? Sven wondered if he should tell her. What if it was a secret? He folded his arms across his chest, looking down at his feet. Secret or not, Dan wouldn't be here anytime soon. And Sven really wanted to know about the waitress and the head of security. Getting more air into his lungs, he told Samantha everything he'd heard. When she heard the doorman, the maid laughed. Dan's got it going on. Yes, Zoe is an angel. She's beautiful, clever, a polyglot. She knows 4 languages. Sven wondered. Why did he say that about her? He called her a bitch. Why? Because she'd put a spell on him. A spell. Well, it wasn't her. It was someone else who put a spell on her. And the other one, as it turned out, was protected. Sven raised his eyebrows as high as possible and couldn't help laughing. Samantha, you're joking. Would I joke about something like that? No, of course not. And I see you're one of those? What those? Well, what do you call yourselves, skeptics? You don't believe in hexing, do you? Well, it's not that I don't believe in it, Sven replied, trying not to offend her. It's more like I don't trust it. How did you realize it? How could I not? For a long time, Dan didn't notice her at all. Then he fell in love with her and chased her around like a dog. She even hid from him. That's why he quit. He couldn't handle the stress. The spell was strong. Can you imagine how bad he feels? Sven said with a nervous chuckle. To be honest, I don't. But I'll tell you, he feels very bad. That's why he's so glum. And who do you think did it? How the hell should I know? It's not a nice place. Sven smiled. Not a good place, you say? You know, Dan said the same thing. He wasn't lying about that. The place is creepy. Shall I tell you the history of this hotel? Sven took a quick glance at his watch and, realizing there was still time, nodded. Of course you will. Well then, listen. Back in the last century, this hotel was built by a very rich man. There were terrible rumors about him in the society. They said he was afraid of daylight. Nobody knew how he made his fortune. Nor did they know his biography. The hotel was built, opened, and then people started disappearing from it. Sven sighed heavily, but he kept his expression unchanged, trying to appear friendly. From the looks of it, it's Samantha who's not entirely rational, to say the least. She's one of those people who believes in ghosts and horoscopes, he thought. Sven decided to listen to the story, even though he realized it would be some kind of childish scare story, and asked, "Where did they disappear to?" One of the survivors told what had happened here. That rich man had built the hotel in such a way that there were many back doors behind its walls. He used the back doors to steal people and lock them in the basement. In fact, there's a whole underground city underneath the hotel. Really? Sven asked skeptically. Is there any confirmation other than rumors? Yes, of course. When the public found out, all the secret passages were concreted over. Some of them are still there, though. They're just hard to find. So the hotel is actually much bigger. The hidden part of the hotel is 2 or even 3 times bigger than the main part. But this, of course, no one alive today has seen. But it's the truth, Samantha replied deftly, looking around. I see. Why would the hotel owner want to steal people? She lowered her voice so that it was hard to make out what she was saying. The man who escaped saw a terrible thing. The owner was stealing people to drink their blood. He was a vampire. Sven couldn't hold back a nervous chuckle. Wow, he replied, although he really wanted to change the subject. He realized that Samantha was very peculiar, but to be so, Sven decided to change the subject. That's a very interesting story. So Dan lied about Zoe? Can we talk to her? You should. She's a very nice and interesting girl. What about the head of security? Dan said he's to be feared, avoided. He's dangerous to even make eye contact with. That's ridiculous. He's a security guard he's supposed to protect, not scare. Samantha got serious. He didn't lie to you here. It's true. Our head of security is best avoided. Sven wondered. What did he do? You don't want to know. Just always keep in mind that he's a dangerous man. Sven was so dumbfounded that he didn't know how to react. It seemed Dan and Samantha were completely different people. Their view of the hotel was radically different, and even the version about the waitress was dissimilar. Samantha had told him that the hotel was cursed, while Dan held a more earthy view. He believed it was the people who were the problem, and as different as they were, they agreed on one thing: the head of security, as silly as it sounded, was dangerous. Sven was beginning to worry in earnest, but his interest in the guard's persona had certainly grown, wondering what he had done wrong. Sven said a quick goodbye to Samantha and hurried to his workplace. Dan, as always, stood at the door with a disgruntled look. "Where have you been?" he asked. "I met a maid." "Which one?" Dan pushed himself off the wall and was now on his feet. "Samantha. You know, the older lady. And that psycho. Did she tell you the story about the vampire owner?" There was silence for a few seconds, and then they laughed at the same time, and Dan said, "Well, yes, the legend is certainly above board. What do you think of the underground city? That's my favorite part." "I like the vampire part better," Sven said with a laugh. "Yeah, I wonder if she's Samantha." "Nothing interesting. Just uneducated and a bit crazy." "What else did she say?" Sven couldn't resist sharing. "That you're wearing a spell." Dan smiled. "Ah, that. But she always finds some magical explanation." "So you had something with Zoe that made you dislike her so much?" "We didn't have a thing. She was just being a big shot." "Swan. Did you like her?" "Well, not that I liked her, but yeah, I wanted to court her and she rejected you." "Is that why you quit?" "No, it wasn't that. But she rejected you, yeah. I don't care about her. She thinks too highly of herself." "But it's clear." "What's clear to you?" "Why you're so angry with her." "It's not that." "Shit. Come on, I don't want to talk about it." With each new day, Sven got to know his team better and better. Dan and Zoe's story had finally been sorted out. It was true, Dan had his eye on a pretty waitress, and she'd rejected him, and in a rude way. It explained a lot of things, like why he disliked her and why Samantha, who loved mysticism and fairy tales, had found such a strange explanation for his crush. Sven was a sociable man and often chatted with one of his colleagues. Gossip was present, of course, and some were openly confrontational at all. Other than that, however, things weren't too bad, at least not as bad as Dan had described it. Ordinary people, just like everywhere else. But one question in particular began to plague Sven: what's wrong with the head of security? And even though he never got to meet him, he decided to find out anyway. He didn't know how. The probationary period came to an end and Sven was officially hired. By this point, Dan had finally allowed himself to leave the workplace, which made Sven upset. Although they wouldn't have been friends in normal life, he was a little more fun to be with at work. Sven decided he needed a new friend. During lunch, Sven met another new face. He turned out to be one of the receptionists. Deciding that this was a perfect match for friendship, Sven cheekily sat down next to him. "Hi, my name's Sven. I'm the new doorman." "We've met," he replied blankly. "My name is Tom. I don't really remember." "Of course you don't. You've got so many people passing through you. How can you remember any one person here? Mind if I join you for lunch?" "Well, you've already sat down." Sven laughed to smooth things over a bit and hurried off to make conversation. "It's a good day today. Personally, I've only come across very nice people." "Yes, that's rare in our line of work," Tom replied. "How are you doing?" Tom threw his fork on the table rather rudely. "Sven, can I ask you a question?" "Sure." "How do you never get tired? All you do all day is talk to people. Don't you want to be quiet at least at lunchtime?" "Well, no," Sven admitted. "Why?" I see. Are you the chatty type? He shrugged. Well, I guess. Tom tapped his fingers on the table. I'm not. Sven nodded, as if to let him know he wasn't offended. Tom, okay. I won't bother you. Thank you. Sven started to eat, but a little while later he spoke up again. Listen. Tom was really pissed off. What else? I like Dan better. Sven smiled guiltily. You two are so much alike. You're both so quiet. What did you want to ask? I've heard a rumor that our head of security is a bit strange. Tom looked round fearfully and spoke in a low voice. He's not weird, he's scary, really scary. You haven't seen him if you're asking questions like that. By the way, no, I haven't seen him yet. Is it true that you should avoid him? Yes, 100%. Sven smiled. Is it true there are vampires around here? You've been talking to Mrs. Samantha, haven't you? Yeah. Right. Well, I'm not telling you anything about vampires. Why not? Don't you believe Samantha's legend? It's not her legend. Samantha didn't invent it. There's a lot of talk about it. Well, do you believe it? Not that I believe it. I don't know. I'm a person who doesn't take anything on faith in advance, Sven replied. Interesting. So what about the head of security? Nothing. Just avoid him. He's a dangerous man. Damn it. But why does everyone talk about it, but no one can explain it? Tom smiled weakly. You'll understand once you see him. Hell yeah. Who the hell is he? Just a little more, and I'll think he's the creator of the Vampire Hotel. Well, look. Imagine a big 2-meter tall man with broad shoulders, bald and very strong ex-military, pumped up, perpetually disgruntled. With a giant scar all over his face, Tom drew the image. Sven clapped his hands unconsciously. Yep. Well, that's what he looks like. Now, add to that image the knowledge that he's a man of hard luck, bitter at everyone and everything. So would you sit down to lunch with him? Sven scratched the back of his head. I don't feel like it. Well, there's a reason you're so scared of him. He's really something to be afraid of. Interesting, Sven said. I don't know, I don't think so. Tom shrugged his shoulders. Now we can eat in silence. The intrigue of the security chief's identity was growing like a snowball. Sven had no doubt now that he was to be feared. He was going to avoid him, but he could not forget him. What kind of a fate had he suffered? Sven decided to talk to someone who might know the life story of this mysterious man. From one of the floor clerks on duty, he inquired, "Who has worked here the longest?" And in response, he heard a name. Miss Caroline, the head of administration. He could only hope that she would be more talkative. Just in case, he asked the desk clerk, "What do you think of the head of security?" To which he received an exhaustive answer. He's like a shark. It's better not to mess with him. And if you do, it's best not to piss him off. Sven was able to see Miss Caroline 3 days later after he'd spoken to the duty officer. The evening shift was coming to an end, and Sven found her in one of the workrooms. From afar, she seemed a good candidate for conversation. Wide smile, straight posture, neatly styled hair. Maybe it was the cost of the profession, one must always exude friendliness. But it was as if Sven had sensed that she would be a good person to talk to. And he was right. "Hello, I'm new here." "A doorman?" she asked. "Yes, hi. Nice to meet you." "My name is Caroline," she replied. "Nice to meet you. Are you busy?" "No," she said in a friendly tone. Sven almost shrieked with joy and sat down next to her. "How are you?" "I'm fine, thank you. And yours? By the way, how do you like it here?" "Well, you know, it's pretty much as I imagined it would be. It's all kind of mystical, isn't it? Whoever I talk to, I get all sorts of information. Some say that the people working here are evil, to put it mildly, and some tell stories that make your blood run cold, and some are just strange. I haven't had a chance to get to the bottom of it yet. But overall, how do you like it here? Overall, I guess yeah, but these vampire stories. Mrs. Caroline laughed. I think I know who you've been talking to. Do you believe in all that? Of course I don't. It's all nonsense. Thank God. Sven was relieved. There are a lot of people who do believe in it, as it turns out. Well, they're just bored. But, you know, Sven, it's better that way than that way, right? Yeah, I suppose you're right. Can I ask you a question? Sure. Is it true you've worked here longer than anyone else? Well, you could say that. I'm one of the old-timers. Oh, that's great. Tell me, can I ask you about someone in particular? Not vampires, I hope. Caroline smiled. No, the head of security. Who is he? Mrs. Caroline's face changed. Ugh. That's a very complicated man. Sven shook his head. God, he exclaimed. Why is that? Why does everyone talk about him like that? Well, because that's the way he is, she said and smiled weakly. Don't mess with him. And stop asking about him. It'll get to him sooner or later. And anyway, forget it. Who the hell is he, this head of security? Sven asked nonchalantly. Can you at least tell me his name and what his fate is? His name is Michael, but you should address him as Mr. Michael. Although, of course, it's best not to talk to him. Why not? Do you know anything about his hard fate? Mrs. Caroline looked round. I know. Tell me, can you keep a secret? Of course I can, Sven replied excitedly. If I don't find out what's wrong with him, I'll go crazy. All I know is that Mr. Michael is unsociable. Most of our team is afraid of him and treats him, shall we say, not in the best way. A lot of people know about his plight, but nobody knows what exactly happened to him. Everyone thinks he's just venting negativity on everyone because of what happened to him. That's basically what it is. But you do know something specific about him, don't you? Yes, I do. Michael and I knew each other in the past. We were both employed at this hotel by the same man, a mutual friend. So this Mr. Michael is one of the old guys like you? Sven asked. Yes. As I said, Mr. Michael is quiet, but he treats me better than the others, so he told me a little about himself. Sven snickered. Apparently it's a mystery behind 7 seals. Actually it is, but I can see you're so interested in him. I'll tell you Mr. Michael's story in return for you promising not to tell anyone, and at least try not to judge him. Thank you, I won't tell anyone, I promise. All right then. In general, Mr. Michael, former officer of special services, held in the Department of Own Security, not the last position, received good money, was married to a good girl who gave birth to his son. Everything was great, so much so that Mr. Michael relaxed. And one day at one of the corporate parties, he fell madly in love with another girl, let's say, with low social responsibility. I don't know what it was about her, but Mr. Michael literally lost his head. Samantha would say he was bewitched. But we know that's not true. She must have been a skilled manipulator, maybe some kind of hypnotist. I don't know. He started courting her immediately, and in the end he was ready to do anything for her, even to leave his family with a child. His wife understood but pretended not to notice, and for nothing. After all, in the end, that second girl set him a condition to kick out his wife or she will leave him. And Mr. Michael was so in love that without a second thought agreed to this terrible act. At that moment, he did not know that his wife was already pregnant with their second child, and when he found out, he convinced her to have an abortion. He left his wife with a child in her arms alone in a strange city, because she was a visitor. He brought his mistress into the house and married her, and forgot about his former family. What happened to his wife is a mystery. Mr. Michael doesn't know, and neither do we. But it was probably because of this act that Mr. Michael's life was in trouble. After a couple of years, he got bored with his beauty, and she started cheating on him left and right. And he put up with it. He was in love. It got to the point where she was having an affair with his boss. Can you imagine the kind of person she is? She turned Mr. Michael's boss's head, and eventually he was scandalously sacked. But Mr. Michael never gave up hope. He tried to get a job somewhere else, spinning like a squirrel in a wheel, afraid of losing his beloved. And that fear didn't endear him to his ex-wife's new boyfriend. He was beaten to a pulp, and that girl left him. He was in intensive care, and when he woke up, he realized he'd lost everything. He had lost his flat, all his money, and of course his beloved. And so he was left with nothing, no job, no home, and no prospects. An old friend of Mr. Michael's, a mutual acquaintance of ours, took pity on him and helped him get a job here as head of security. Whatever Mr. Michael's personal life, he's a good worker. And now he lives on the outskirts of New York, in a tiny flat, works here, and that's it. It's not an easy fate, but it seems worthy of its owner. Sven opened his eyes wide. Wow. I was expecting something else. Well, how is it? Miss Caroline remarked. Of course he's offended at the world after that. Sven tilted his head to the side. Well, I suppose. But it's his own fault, really, isn't he? Yes, I suppose so, agreed Mrs. Caroline. But I think he's paid the price too harshly. Where's his wife? You know, the first one who gave him the baby. Mrs. Caroline shrugged her shoulders. I don't know, and nobody knows. Well, have I satisfied your interest? She asked. Sven decided to think for a moment before answering. Although he expected something different, he felt he was glad to know the answer to his question. It wasn't really the head of security that interested Sven. In fact, it wasn't just him. He wanted so much to know the secrets of this place, why everyone talked about it, what the wide doors of the hotel hid. It was only after all this time that he realized it held no secrets. It's all people's fault. Every man has his own special destiny. Yes, thank you for telling me, said Sven. I won't tell anyone. That's good, Mrs. Caroline said. She looked over Sven's shoulder and her eyes widened. Wow, we were just talking about him. There he is. Where? Mr. Michael walked into the staff room. The door swung wide open, and the thud of the door hitting the wall made everyone in the room wince. All eyes were fixed on Mr. Michael, but he didn't care about that. He swept everyone present with his crowning glare and found his target the head of administration named Mrs. Caroline. With a confident stride, Mr. Michael made his way towards her, ignoring everyone else. He was so sick of everyone looking at him like he was some kind of superstar. And when Mr. Michael gave them his crooked stare, they shamefully hid their eyes. Idiots, he thought. They'd be better off with themselves than with this silly gossip. Mr. Michael didn't know if that mystical first hotelier existed, but with each new day he realized that he was getting more and more fed up with these tales. If it were up to him, he would send these fools down to the basement. As he approached Mrs. Caroline, he noticed only now that she was not alone. Opposite her sat some kid, afraid to lift his head. His softness and fearfulness made Mr. Michael angry. Who's that? He asked the receptionist. This is our new doorman. Name's Sven, she replied. Mr. Michael glared at the boy, expecting him to at least look back at him. But the puny boy was staring at his feet and shaking. Hey, doorman, get out of here. Grown-ups need to talk, Mr. Michael said gruffly. Sven rose slowly to his feet. Sure, I'm sorry, he mumbled and ran away. Mr. Michael flopped down in his seat, though the chair was a little small for him, to say the least. Mrs. Caroline sighed heavily. Why did you scare Sven? He doesn't seem a bad boy. Just to let him know, said Mr. Michael dryly. That's why everybody's afraid of you. Do you know they really do scare the newbies with you? And thank them very much for that. Mr. Michael replied loudly. At least some good came from the gossip and I stopped being harassed by those freaks. Were you looking for me? Mrs. Caroline asked, shaking her head. Yes, replied Mr. Michael. Is something wrong? Yes, something important is going to happen at our hotel very soon. Yes, what is it? Mr. Michael lowered his voice. There's going to be a wedding. Oh, good. Is it a secret? Why are you whispering? No, but I don't want our staff to get overexcited. Michael, I don't understand you. Well, a wedding is a wedding. It feels like a first time. It's about the groom. It's our mayor. What? It's Mrs. Caroline couldn't finish the word because Mr. Michael had his hand over her mouth. Shut up, will you? Yes, the mayor of our town. She pushed the rude man away and said, I'm just shocked. That's why it's best to keep a low profile. We're preparing little by little and keeping the team calm. Who's the bride? Mr. Michael shrugged. Nobody knows. That's the real mystery right there. I've been looking on the internet, and from what I gather, she's carefully hiding her identity. I wonder why she would do that. Why not reveal herself right away? Everyone will find out who she is sooner or later anyway. Mr. Michael frowned. Don't you realize? It's the bloody mayor. Do you have any idea how much power he has and how much money? People like that are protective of their personal lives, and for good reason. It's usually the people closest to them that they manipulate. You mean he's hiding his fiancée because he's afraid for her? Yeah, I guess he is. Okay, well, I get it. Let's get ready and keep it quiet about whose wedding it's going to be. By the way, what are you worried about? Nobody's talking to you anyway. That's not what I'm worried about. It's days like this when you have to be on your guard. Politics is like a red rag to a bull for terrorists. Oh, now I'm nervous. Chuckles, yeah. Well, anyway, get ready, Mr. Michael said and stood up abruptly. He left the room as quickly as he had entered it. He slammed the door against the wall, and at the end of it, he gave everyone a disgruntled look at how much he hated them all. But of course, he hated himself first and foremost. Mr. Michael had lost everything, and more importantly, how so stupid and so ridiculous to lose everything because of some girl. Mr. Michael was well aware that he had ruined more than one life. He walked towards his office, noticing perfectly well how they were afraid of him. They hid their eyes, turned away, pretended not to notice him. What morons they all are, he thought. Mr. Michael had always dreamed of going somewhere in the middle of nowhere. Already on his way to his workplace, a beautiful long-haired girl, so familiar, swept past him. His heart raced and he called out to her. Jane, Jane, stop. But the girl went on ahead. Mr. Michael flushed with emotion and followed her with a firm step. He grabbed her roughly by the shoulder, forcing her to turn round. Jane, you've got me confused with someone else. Keep your hands to yourself, she said. Mr. Michael jerked as if slapped and took a step back. It wasn't Jane. It was the one that had crossed his mind most often in recent years. Jane was the name of his first wife, sweet and gentle and so kind. It was only after losing everything that Mr. Michael realized how wrong he'd been. But nothing could be changed. He remembered her only after he was left with nothing, dreaming of her beauty, kindness, and obedience. He remembered what a wonderful cook she was, what a marvelous hostess she was, and no matter how hard Mr. Michael tried, he could never find her. He thought of Jane every day, went to sleep, and woke up thinking of her. He could always see her in the crowd, dream about her. And though Mr. Michael knew that she would never forgive him, he longed to look at her once more. He had his own son, his only son, and Mr. Michael had traded him in for some cheap girl. Looking at the girl who looked so much like Jane, he felt his heart constrict. This isn't her, Mr. Michael thought. He walked into the office, sat down and thought, why did I ever think I could recognize her? After all these years, she must have changed a lot. Maybe her hair wasn't as long. Maybe she'd changed the way she dressed, learned to wear heels. Mr. Michael grimaced. How many times can I bring her up? It was like there was nothing else to think about. He tried to put her out of his mind and even succeeded. But the intrusive thoughts were replaced by the memory of his son. He must be over 20 now. Mr. Michael shook his head. We need to focus on the wedding. He called his boss to discuss future events. A few days later, everyone knew about the wedding. The staff was almost torn as they discussed the future guests, some wondering who the bride would be. Some wanted at least a glimpse of the mayor, but Mr. Michael didn't give a damn. He made his way through the crowd of colleagues, not forgetting to push with his rock-hard shoulders. "What are you all piled up here for?" he asked in a voice that sounded like thunder. The colleagues fell silent. Mr. Michael glared at them contemptuously, waiting for some daredevil to take the lead. "What are you standing there for? Get out," Mr. Michael growled. The maids, waitresses, doormen, and many others parted. Clenching his fists, he headed down the path set aside for him. Suddenly, he heard an unfamiliar voice. "The representative of the wedding customers is arriving once again today. We're interested in seeing him." Mr. Michael became furious. "Who said that?" he asked, turning round sharply. The doorman took an uncertain step forward. "It's me. My name is Sven. You better stay out of my way," Mr. Michael growled. "Well, you asked," Mr. Michael said the doorman. "I don't care. You're just standing here like idiots to see some representative. You're just sick." But there was a woman's voice. "The rep is so cute." "Zoe, shut up," Mr. Michael whispered. He did not continue the conversation and quickly left the corridor where the crowd had formed. He heard shouts of admiration for the representative. "He's so handsome, young, and rich. I hope he'll look at me," and so on. The door slammed shut, cutting Mr. Michael off from this annoying muttering. "I think the female half of the staff have gone mad," he thought. Mr. Michael was angry, though he didn't understand why the workday was going on as usual. He was minding his own business when suddenly he accidentally bumped into someone he had never seen before. He was a tall young man. Not expecting to be hit by a big man like himself, the stranger jumped aside. "Hey man, watch it," he exclaimed. Of course, Mr. Michael had not expected such impertinence. He slowly turned round and gave a wolfish stare. "Say that again." Look where you're going," said the young man, rubbing his bruised shoulder. "Who are you?" Mr. Michael asked him firmly. "Who are you? Why are you acting like this? What are you, the center of the earth?" Mr. Michael closed his eyes, counting to 5, 1, 2, 3. A long time ago, a psychiatrist he knew had taught him how to calm down so he wouldn't make a scene. 4. Mr. Michael opened his eyes sharply. "Shut your mouth, puppy, before I smash you against the wall," he growled. "Uncle, you're out of your mind. Maybe I should get you some pills." Joked the stranger. Mr. Michael couldn't stand it and pinned the insolent man against the wall, using only one arm. The young man hung in the air, beginning to suffocate. "Let go." "Who are you?" "Just another night doorman. Didn't they teach you to speak to those above your rank?" he hissed. "I represent the interests of the wedding," he said in a low voice. Mr. Michael released his hand, and his companion fell to the floor, breathing heavily. "What are you doing?" he asked, panting. "Don't forget who you're talking to." Mr. Michael spat out the words and started to leave. But he didn't. From somewhere in the distance came the familiar disgruntled voice of the supervisor. "What's going on here?" The representative, barely breathing, pointed his finger in the direction of Mr. Michael. "That man, he's rabid. He almost strangled me," said the victim. The boss flew over to him, helped him up, and apologized. "I'm sorry, for God's sake. I'm sorry. It's our security guard." "Are you kidding me? He's the one you should be guarding everyone from." "I'm sorry, we'll fire him. I'll find someone who can help you." The hotel manager made a quick call, and in a couple of minutes a pretty girl appeared in the corridor where the altercation had taken place. She took the injured man under the elbow and led him away in an unknown direction. Mr. Michael and his boss were left alone. "What is this?" asked the disgruntled boss. "What?" mumbled Mr. Michael. "What the hell is this? So everyone's afraid of you, Michael. You, and you're our head of security, by the way. You've intimidated the staff, fine, but you're already lashing out at the guests, and that's out of line. Mr. Michael mumbled something to himself. I want you to act like a human being, the boss continued. Mr. Michael rolled his eyes. I'm acting normal. This guy asked for it. You ask for everything. Do I have to fire you or what? Mr. Michael chuckled. Well, if you promise that ghoul, then go ahead. The manager hesitated. Shit, you know I wouldn't go for that, don't you? Yeah, I suspect not. Of course you're valuable. Where else would I find someone like you? He scratched his chin. This conversation is over. I've got to go, but promise me that was the last time, the boss said. Mr. Michael promised nothing. He knew himself well. He couldn't help himself when he was being rude. With his usual firm step, he went back to the office and tried to forget about it. After all, such an important event for the whole hotel was right around the corner. The day of the wedding had arrived. The hotel literally stood on its ears. From the very early morning began to arrive such guests, at the sight of which even the most steadfast workers lost their grip. Singers, actors, comedians, politicians, artists. It seemed that the best of the best had been invited to this celebration. Waitresses turned up their noses in the hope that some celebrity would pay attention to them. The cooks were going crazy at the cooker, realizing the risk of making a mistake. The maids ran around, peering with interest into the faces of the guests. Even the guards, Mr. Michael's subordinates, were staring at the visitors. Everyone was delighted. Everyone except Mr. Michael. To him, all this pomp seemed too gaudy and overly flamboyant. As much as Mr. Michael would have liked to leave, he wanted the day to come to an end, but he had to work, and work well. From a security point of view, this day could have brought a lot of trouble. The guests were very important people, and Mr. Michael knew better than anyone else that such people had to be guarded with the utmost care. For ordinary visitors, rich though they were unlikely to be of much interest to anyone. Politicians, on the other hand, should always be in the public eye. Mr. Michael watched the faces of those who came in while his guards were examining suspicious items. He was busy assessing the overall situation. In this kind of confusion, someone dangerous could sneak in. No matter how Mr. Michael felt about his colleagues and his guests, he still knew for sure that anything, even his own life, would be sacrificed for the safety of those around him. Staring at the camera monitor, Mr. Michael's heart thudded. He thought he saw a familiar face. No, it wasn't Jane, but someone connected to her. The girl skipped past those annoying guards and the new doorman, scrutinizing the interior. No wonder, as far as Mr. Michael remembered, that lady lived rather poorly. Then what was she doing here? Mr. Michael strained to remember her name. Isabella, perhaps? No, he would never remember whether it was Isabella or not. It didn't matter at all, for it was not the name that interested Mr. Michael. This girl he saw was Jane's best friend. They were in the same class. He'd only seen her a few times in his life, at a wedding and his wife's birthday party. What are the chances that Mr. Michael wasn't mistaken? And if he wasn't wrong, what was she doing here? After a little thought, Mr. Michael jumped up from his seat, and a couple of minutes later was standing in front of the doorman, looking down at him. What's your name? Sven? Mr. Michael asked irritably. Sven, the man replied. How's it going? What? None of your business, Mr. Michael retorted. All right, and I've got. Shut up. Sven obediently shut up. Mr. Michael counted to himself and then raised his voice again. A girl with a short haircut and white hair just walked by. Got it, Mr. Michael. To be honest, I don't have such a good memory. Well, put it to the test. Sven thought for a moment. Well, it's a bit simple, isn't it? I wondered what she was doing here. Yes, agreed Mr. Michael. What did she say? What did she ask? Oh, nothing much. She asked where the toilet was. Mr. Michael pressed his lips together. Shit, he frowned. Sven asked, embarrassed. Why, do you know her? Why do you care? Mr. Michael cut him off. He was silent for a moment, and then he said, You know, I think you should let it go. What? What are you talking about? Mr. Michael didn't understand. Mr. Michael was ready to explode. Did this guy really know something? He was already clenching his fists before he could count to 3. But the work radio made such a sound that Mr. Michael knew it was no good. He rushed towards the guard post, knocking down everyone in his way. This sound is used only in extreme cases. He arrived on the scene and immediately asked, "What's wrong?" "Mr. Michael, there's trouble. Unknown persons called with the message that there is a bomb in the restaurant hall." "Oh shit," he cursed. "Did you get the number?" "Begin evacuation," a voice said. "Calm down," Mr. Michael interrupted. "First, we have to make sure that the information is not false. That is, while we're sitting tight, you be vigilant. This message could be a distraction." They gave the coordinates of the bomb, where it is, someone said. "Yes, but they could have lied," Mr. Michael replied. "Good. Wait for instructions. I'll check it carefully. I don't want to cause a panic. Call the bomb squad." Mr. Michael rolled his eyes as he put on his pre-prepared waistcoat. "Stay in touch. I'm on my way." He tried his best to keep a straight face as he stepped inside the banquet hall. The wedding was in full swing. The music, the noise. All the politicians and celebrities were dancing, singing, shouting toasts. Mr. Michael grimaced. They're rich, but they're acting like savages, trying not to arouse suspicion or cause unnecessary panic. He went to the coordinates he had sent to check for a bomb. In general, Mr. Michael was calm. Having vast experience in law enforcement agencies, he knew very well as a rule, information about a bomb is false. With a keen eye on all the places where it could theoretically be, Mr. Michael breathed a sigh of relief. "They lied," as always, he said into the radio. Mr. Michael checked everything thoroughly several times and said there was no bomb. He was about to leave when he noticed a familiar face. The same friend of Jane's he had seen on the cameras was standing next to the bride, gesticulating vigorously and obviously telling her something. He frowned, heading in her direction. Why? He hadn't decided yet. He walked towards her with a firm step, when suddenly that lady flew off in an unknown direction, leaving his fiancée alone. Mr. Michael paused, wondering if he should approach the bride. Probably some pompous girl, and she wouldn't want to talk to him. He stared at the bride's back, then looked closer at the groom. The mayor was sitting at the table, talking to someone. Mr. Michael stood back, watching them, while the bride danced alone. For some unknown reason, but he looked her over with an appraising eye. There was something vaguely familiar in her movements. Suddenly she turned round to face him, and Mr. Michael was stunned. It was Jane himself. Mr. Michael had imagined this moment so often that he had forgotten how to breathe, and earlier he'd thought he couldn't recognize her. No, he would recognize her out of 1,000. His heart was pounding, and Mr. Michael, on the other hand, froze, not knowing what to do. Was his ex-wife the same one he had left with nothing alone, marrying the mayor? How could that be possible? Jane danced until she was tired. She stepped aside, and Mr. Michael knew it was time to act. It seems that the bomb information was nothing more than a joke by some idiots. So he could afford to relax, even just a little. On woozy legs, he walked over to her, not knowing what to say. She had changed so much. Her hair was shorter, her lips chubbier than before. And apparently she'd learned to walk in heels after all. "Jane," he whispered in a shaky voice. If anyone saw him now, they certainly wouldn't recognize Mr. Michael. Jane frowned and gave him a brief glance. "Do we know each other? Who are you?" He took a step forward. "Yes." She looked him over from head to toe. "Are you the security guard? Is something wrong?" "No, it's me, Michael." "Michael who?" Jane asked, perplexed. Mr. Michael's face changed. "Oh, it's you?" she exclaimed. "I am," he replied, averting his gaze. His conscience had been awake for some time, but now it came to him once more. The shame consumed Mr. Michael, and he said, faintly but still quietly, "I'm sorry." She snorted. "I don't want to." Tears glistened in the eyes of the huge, bald, scarred Mr. Michael. "I understand, but at least you'll think about it sometime." she replied dryly. Maybe she replied dryly. What are you doing here? Working. And I take it you're getting married? I already am, Jane smirked. Where's your sweetheart? I have no idea. You don't? I could hear the sarcasm in her words. Where's our son? Our son? You mean my son? He won't even remember you, and you're nothing to him. Mr. Michael was prepared to take any insult from her just to be near her. He decided to change the subject. Jane, how did you do it? What? Get married? She laughed. Did you think you were going to make me cry for the rest of my life? No, I was just wondering how you managed it all. I worked. Steadfast, she replied. Long and hard. My friends gave me money, I rented a flat, got 2 jobs. I was a salesman by night and a travel agent by day. That's where I met my future husband, by the way. The mayor came to you to pick out a tour? Yes, that's right. Is there anything else you wanted? I have to get back to my guests. Many questions were on his tongue, but Mr. Michael decided to ask something distant. Ah, that's what that white rat was doing here. What's her name, Isabella? Emma is my best friend, and don't you dare call her that. Jane flared up. I'm sorry, I saw her on the cameras and I was surprised. I wondered what she was doing here. I thought she couldn't afford a place like this. And she's a bridesmaid. Interesting? That's right. Emma flew in from our hometown for my wedding, and I'll be grateful to her for the rest of my life, because she was the one who saved me, gave me money, supported me, worried. That's how some women turn out to be much more courageous than men. That's right, Mr. Michael said. I hope she's doing well. And you too. Yeah, I'll go, Jane said. I don't even know why I'm talking to you after everything you've done. I just wanted to apologize for everything. Jane put her head down, but suddenly a rather rough voice made her turn round. Mum, get away from him, shouted a young man familiar to Mr. Michael. He's a psychopath, and he nearly strangled me. Mr. Michael realized, in the one who had called Jane Mum, he recognized the representative of the wedding planner he had clashed with recently in the corridor. He folded his arms across his chest and looked defiant. At the same time, Jane asked in surprise, John, what are you doing? Mr. Michael's jaw almost dropped. After Jane had called him by his first name, the simple truth came to him. He'd almost strangled his own son in the corridor. He wanted to fall to the ground in shame. At the same time, John approached Mr. Michael and looked him contemptuously in the eye. What the hell are you doing here? You should have been sacked. Mr. Michael didn't break eye contact, but he wasn't in the mood for an argument. He put his hand on John's shoulder under the surprised looks and squeezed it. Son. John laughed, brushing his hand off. Man, what are you? He looked at Jane. Mum, John sighed heavily. Is it true? Look at it. There he is, your father, she said mockingly. The same one who left us, who threw his pregnant wife and baby out on the street. Is that how you imagined him? There he is. John wrinkled his nose. Yes, I'd be glad not to know him. Mr. Michael blushed, turned pale. Even he had literally no words to try to defend his honor in just a few minutes. His conscience, however, would not even allow him to open his mouth in their direction. He lowered his head, deciding that he was worthy of any insults. But there were none, for at the same second there was a loud, chilling clap. Mr. Michael knew that sound well. While the artists and politicians, who knew only the good life, turned their heads, he got down to business. The minutes counted. Grabbing his ex-wife and son under his arms, he began to lead them, covering them, towards an emergency secret exit. Jane stopped understanding anything and blindly followed her ex-husband, and John tried to break free. What's going on? But his mother quickly made him realize that this was no time for jokes. Follow your father now. All this lasted only a couple of seconds, but Mr. Michael quickly realized what was going on. Long before the main villains appeared, armed terrorists burst into the banquet hall. The guests screamed in terror. Someone fainted. Most of them rushed to the exit, but the way was blocked. A terrorist, probably the ringleader, fired a machine gun into the ceiling. It down on the ground. But they didn't yet know who they were messing with. There was someone in the banquet hall who was out of their league. Mr. Michael knew at once what had happened. The terrorists had called in false information to distract the guards from the main action. Once they got rid of the guards, they planned to take hostages. And they would have definitely succeeded if it weren't for one thing. Mr. Michael stopped by the banquet hall to apologize. He immediately realized that the terrorists' target was not the entire hall, but just a few people, the mayor. The target was clear as day. The mayor and, of course, the people closest to him, i.e., his wife and stepson. Realizing all this, Mr. Michael acted as quickly as he could. He quickly muttered into his radio, informing his subordinates of the incident and dragging Jane and John behind him, sending them out through the service exit, ordering them to run as fast as possible, and of course to call for backup. But there was no way he could leave on his own. He suspected that the terrorists had come solely for the mayor, that is, his ex-wife's new husband, and no matter how he felt about him, he couldn't do otherwise. He returned to the banquet hall quietly, almost imperceptibly. He noticed that the mayor was being closely followed by one of the terrorists. He devised a plan. He burst in unexpectedly, took a few bullets, but luckily he was wearing a bulletproof vest. He grabbed the mayor and quickly, even lightning fast, brought him to the service exit. "Save yourselves," he shouted, forcibly pushing the hostage, "and take care of my wife." Scared half to death, the mayor obeyed and ran down the back stairs to call for help, and Mr. Michael was obliged to return to help the other hostages. But before he could even turn around, he was shot in the neck, falling backwards. Mr. Michael lost track of time. He had basically lost time, place, and the essence of life, and he seemed to be submerged in a deep vat of water. He'd come out of it, and then he'd sink deeper. The first time he opened his eyes, he saw the panic of the medics. Then he saw an illuminated tunnel, and then he saw them. Mr. Michael opened his eyes, barely breathing. Jane and John were leaning over him. The son held his crying mother close to him and was the first to notice that Mr. Michael was awake. "Daddy," he shouted like a boy. "Son." Mr. Michael called out to him with great difficulty. "You forgive me, Dad, live. Dad, I forgive you. Just live." Jane turned to Mr. Michael and gently, so as not to hurt him, pressed him against her. "We forgive you. You saved us. You saved my husband. I'm having trouble breathing. Am I in the hospital?" "Yes, you've lost a lot of blood, but there's a chance," John answered. "There isn't," Mr. Michael said, losing his strength. "Promise me that ... that. We'll do anything." Jane shouted. "Take care of my dog. She's at home, a Labrador, my golden." Of course, Father John couldn't hold back his tears. "I'm proud of you." "Goodbye," Mr. Michael said quietly, and after these words his life was cut short. He died a true hero. Thanks to him, it was possible not only to save many lives, but also to neutralize the terrorists. All those who knew him spoke of him with respect, and although he had once done bad things, he managed to redeem himself. A plaque with his name and surname was hung right in the hotel, dubbing Mr. Michael a hero posthumously. The entire hotel staff attended the funeral, unable to hold back tears. Though most had not got to know him properly during his lifetime, he was missed. Once again, rumors spread around the hotel. This time, however, they were true. No one brought up vampires, maniacs, or even fictional blood rituals. Everyone was discussing the hero. Maybe the stories about him would be told very differently in the distant future. But for now, everyone knew that Mr. Michael was a hero. Mr. Michael's own son had taken custody of the loyal dog. Luckily, John loved dogs. For years, he dreamed of having one of his own, but had been hesitant to buy one. Heaven probably heard him, albeit in such a subtle way. John took the dog for himself and now remembered his father every day. Many people were surprised to learn that in the evenings, frowning Mr. Michael walked a good-natured golden Labrador. The dog was very kind. You could tell he'd been raised by a good man. Jane lived happily as the mayor's wife. Like Mr. Michael's eldest son, she remembered him. But not often, but now only with a kind word. After a year of married life, Jane became pregnant and gave birth to a second son. Her husband had suggested naming him after the man who had saved their lives. Heavy rain pounded on the umbrellas. Despite the mud underfoot, Sven stood still. No one traveled to the cemetery at this hour. But Sven didn't care. He was looking at the grave of Mr. Michael, a man he had never really known. Yet he felt such pride simply for the fact that they had been fortunate enough to know each other. He stared at the gravestone, pondering. He loved coming here to think. It seemed Mr. Michael could hear him, could talk to him. And though Sven realized it was strange, he didn't care. He looked round and said faintly, "Mr. Michael, I should propose to Zoe." "I'm afraid she'll say no," he said. A bright bolt of lightning struck somewhere in the distance, illuminating the dark graveyard for a split second, and Sven smiled broadly, taking it as a sign from Mr. Mike. "Thank you, Mr. Michael," he said. "I'm on my way to buy the ring now." Taylor wandered through the streets of the small, dusty town. Provincial Sunset City greeted the man with marvelous weather. Warm, but not an exhausting heat wave like Los Angeles. The sky was slightly overcast, and there was a pleasant freshness in the air. The man is here on a business trip. The company, where he worked as a general manager, planned to open branches in such small towns. And this, in Taylor's opinion, was a very successful and profitable project. Taylor had already held a business meeting, agreed on everything with the local administration. In fact, that was the purpose of his trip. And now he was walking back to the hotel. No, Taylor, of course, was offered transportation and local cab drivers. The man himself decided to walk around the city. He wanted to walk through these narrow streets, to see how the people lived here. The city reminded the man of Cedar Rapids, the place where he had been born and raised. In such small communities, of course, there is little for young people to do. There is nowhere to go to study after school, no clubs and sections. But it is a pleasure to raise children in such towns. Everyone knows each other. A first grader is not afraid to let go to school alone. The distance is minimal. There is no need to stand in traffic jams at 8 a.m. to take your child, for example, to a doctor's appointment. And the children for themselves, local streets, abandoned wastelands. A perfect arena for all kinds of games: hide and seek, catch up. Taylor even smiled, remembering his own childhood. Just then, a group of boys about 8 or 10 years old, tanned, in shorts and sandals, slightly disheveled, thin, impetuous, rushed past him. These guys were obviously playing some kind of their own, very interesting game. The motley crowd swept down the street and disappeared around the corner. Taylor looked at them with a smile. He and his son used to run around with friends like this all day long. Summer vacation was the happiest, most carefree time. You run around, you jump around. Then you fly home, run to the 5th, the very last floor, and open the door with your key, which at that time all children had on a string around their necks. And there's a smiling, kind grandmother, the heady aroma of jam pies and a cat, an old, fat, cheeky, but so beloved gray Christopher. Taylor couldn't hold back a smile. He felt good with his grandmother, cozy, calm, nourished. She had, in fact, raised him. In Taylor's childhood, his mother did not appear often, and it was always a bright event for him. Mom usually came unexpectedly, all dressed up. According to his grandmother, beautiful, young, stylishly dressed, skillfully made up. She wasn't like the mothers of Taylor's friends. Those were ordinary housewives in bathrobes, and Taylor's mom looked like a TV star and acted like one. Taylor was proud that he had her so special. His grandmother said that his mom had a lot of work, and she worked as a journalist in New York City, writing stories for the newspaper and radio hosts. She also works part-time as a freelance reporter for a beauty magazine. Mom often told about her work to her grandmother, Taylor, friends who sometimes, having learned about the arrival of his mother, came to visit her. As a boy, Taylor listened to these stories. They were interesting, exciting, funny. Mom seemed to the boy as the heroine of a bright movie. He looked at her as a deity. His mother always came from New York with gifts. She'd pull out an interesting toy from her suitcase. Yes, the kind that in Cedar Rapids, where Taylor's childhood passed, has never been. He'd give him a stylish suit or sneakers. And once when he was very young, his mother bought him a Walkman and a set of cassettes. Even high school students were jealous of Taylor, offering him money for the player and asking him to listen to it. The boy felt like a king. Taylor adored his mother. Her appearance in his and his grandmother's apartment made him the happiest man on earth. And it wasn't just the presents, of course. True, his mother always appeared for a short time, a couple of nights at most, and then returned to her bright, busy life in New York. And there was no place for her son in that life. Taylor realized that later when he was a little older. Taylor clearly remembered how his neighbor Mrs. Collins sighed once, looking at him, and said something like, "Poor boy," like a round orphan with a living mother. And then there was that conversation Taylor had overheard between his grandmother and her friend. Taylor had gotten home early from school that day, opened the door with his key and overheard the whole thing. Grandma was sitting with her neighbor in the kitchen. The older women were drinking tea and discussing him, Taylor and his mom. It was the neighbor who had said many unkind things about Mom, that she had a lot of suitors in New York. That's why the woman does not pay attention to her son, gives little money for his maintenance. And all that cares about the boy, she transferred to his grandmother with peace of mind. And she herself lives at her own pleasure. The grandmother seemed to have nothing to object. She tried her best to protect her daughter, talked about the difficult life of a single mother, assured that she worked so hard only for the sake of her son. But all her arguments broke down on the arguments of the neighbor. And Taylor then realized the grandmother herself did not believe her own words, that her daughter simply had no choice. Since then, Taylor had come to realize that his mom wasn't a perfect woman or a superhero. And it hurt a lot. The grandmother gave her only grandson all her care, love, attention. But as the boy grew older, it was his mother who was missing more and more often. There was nothing to say about his father. Taylor did not know him at all. But Mom is young and energetic, modern. She was never there for him in times of need. Never. Taylor caught pneumonia and almost died in the hospital. Never. It was time for the kid to decide on a career. Grandma was always there for him, just Grandma. So soft, cozy, kind. But the mother appeared only sporadically and did not particularly seek to get into the problems and affairs of a growing son. Since the age of 12, Taylor clearly saw her indifference to himself. His mother came to him and his grandmother as if only to serve a heavy duty, to put a check mark in the list of urgent tasks opposite the item communication with his son. Gradually, Taylor began to feel something of a dislike for his parent. When she visited, Taylor would try to go to a friend's house or lock himself in his room. But he couldn't stand his mother's visits anymore. He couldn't stand it. It was hard on him. Taylor, walking past the ice cream parlor, suddenly remembered how his grandmother used to take him to the same cafe every morning on his birthday and let him order whatever he wanted: soda, ice cream, chocolate. And then for lunch, Grandma would bake a delicious cake, pull out cans of compote from the pantry, and call the neighborhood boys to the table. Mother was never present at these celebrations. She usually arrived a couple of weeks later. With gifts, of course, she congratulated her son and hurried back to her beautiful life, as it seemed to Taylor at the time. Only once did he and his grandmother visit his mother in New York City by themselves. The huge city at first a little frightened Taylor, but soon the boy fell in love with it. There was so much here: a zoo, a huge amusement park, not like in their Chicago wide streets, fountains. The cars were huge, bright, beautiful. Mom lived in a small rented apartment. One room, but spacious, bright, clean. Taylor loved the view from the balcony: high-rise buildings, roads, motley crowds of people streaming through the streets. You could look at it forever. Taylor often asked his grandmother later, when are they going to visit Mom again? He was so excited to see New York City again. Secretly, the boy dreamed that his mother would someday take him to live with her. But for some reason, his grandmother avoided answering. And one day she irritably shouted at her grandson, "When shall we go? When will we go?" "Never. Your mother doesn't have time. She has a private life there. Why should we meddle in it?" That's how Taylor knew her grandmother wasn't happy with her daughter's behavior either. Yes, she defends her to the neighbors, but Grandma still seems to be hurt and resentful. By the time it was time for Taylor to go to university, he almost hated his mother for her indifference, for her inattention, for always putting her work and her fans ahead of her son and mother. He chose the local university, easily entered the prestigious law department. Neighbors were surprised, thought that Taylor should go to New York, closer to his mother, to enter the Metropolitan University. But at that age, Taylor wanted nothing to do with the woman who gave birth to him. He didn't like her. And the guy was very worried about his grandmother. She was already very old, her heart often seized. Taylor stayed with her to keep an eye on his family. And in his 3rd year, he had his first love. And it was the kind of love that blew his mind. Before Taylor first saw Melanie, he had no idea that he was capable of such feelings. At that time, the guy met with a former classmate, Sharon, went with her to the movies, to dance at the local waterfront, walked by the hand. Everything was orderly, peaceful, exemplary. Sharon was a nice, pretty girl. Sensitive, not stupid. She made Taylor feel at ease, but nothing more. Melanie was a real passion. And then they found out they had a lot in common. A slender girl with long hair the color of melted chocolate and bright black eyes Taylor noticed at once. She was sitting on a bench in the courtyard of the university. This brightly colored beauty immediately caught the guy's eye. He sat at a distance, pretending that he was deep into his notes, but he secretly watched the beautiful stranger. Once the girl intercepted his gaze, Taylor was embarrassed. But the stranger apparently recognized the feelings of the guy and smiled at him, and that was it Taylor realized that he was missing. The girl gracefully slipped off the bench and approached him. She smiled again. Anyway, Taylor never made it back to his classes that day. He and Melanie, that was the name of the beautiful stranger, went wandering around the city. Taylor felt happy and free then. He put his arms around Melanie's waist, kissing her in front of everyone. The girl liked it all, which made the guy's head spin. He never once thought about Sharon during that walk. Then, of course, he had to explain himself to his friend. Sharon cried, begged him to stay. It seemed that she really loved Taylor, but he was already irresistibly attracted to Melanie. Bold, beautiful, a little willful. Melanie came from a so-called dysfunctional family. She and her mother and younger brothers lived on the outskirts of the city, in one of the poorest neighborhoods in Detroit. Melanie's mother drank, changed suitors like gloves. And that's what she saw from a very young age. You know, she didn't care about me or my brothers. And it's always been like that, Melanie shared. She could disappear for 3 or 4 days. She always loved adventure, and we, the abandoned, survived as best we could. I tried very hard to create some semblance of well-being so that my brothers and I wouldn't be taken to the orphanage. I was afraid of that. Maybe for nothing. Maybe we'd be better off at the orphanage. Taylor nodded gravely. He understood Melanie as well as anyone. He'd been an orphan himself, with a living mother. His mom didn't need the kid either. He was just in her way. Of course, Taylor's situation was much better than Melanie's. He lived in a clean, cozy apartment, and his grandmother looked after him. But as far as his father's absence and his mother's total indifference were concerned, it was almost a perfect match. I felt like my brothers and I were just in her way. Melanie shared details of her childhood. Taylor felt the same way. He was in his mother's way, an unfortunate misunderstanding in her life. Was it hard living with your mother? He asked Melanie. The girl didn't go to school. She worked part-time as a waitress in a local bar. They wouldn't take her anywhere else without an education. She didn't starve, of course, except that her salary wasn't enough to rent a place of her own. She had to live with her mother and brothers in a ramshackle barracks on the outskirts of town. Melanie's mother was often visited by friends, girlfriends, and most unpleasantly admirers. Noise, smoke, endless fights and quarrels. Melanie seemed to be used to all of this, but Taylor could see perfectly well it was hard for her to live at home. She was unhappy. And how can one be happy in such conditions? Taylor found a way out of the situation, proposed to the girl. Yeah, it's a little early. Like the future newlyweds were only 19, not even 20 years old. Taylor still had a lot of studying to do. But what do we do? Melanie can't be in this environment. Taylor will not be able to rent an apartment for her, and just to live like this, and a girl in his room grandmother is unlikely to allow. She's an old-fashioned person. But if Melanie signs with Taylor, that's a different story. And what a blessing it would be anyway. Living with the one you love and never having to leave her side, never having to worry about how or where she sleeps. To fall asleep and wake up in each other's arms. To take care of each other, to watch TV in the evenings, to plan something, Taylor reasoned. Melanie was thrilled with the idea. It would be awesome to be your wife. I really want to be your wife, she said. Taylor's grandmother, and even more so Taylor's mother, was not informed. The young people applied to the local registry office. A month later, they were married. The newlyweds appeared at the solemn event in jeans and t-shirts. True, Taylor still bought the bride a beautiful bouquet. The woman from the registry office disapprovingly looked at the future spouses, in jeans at the wedding. The dressed-up ladies arched their eyebrows in surprise. In line outside the door stood several traditional couples, bride, groom. They were accompanied by annoyed guests. And Taylor and Melanie showed up alone. Yeah, in jeans, Taylor nodded importantly. Who cares what we're wearing? It's about feelings, relationships. Green, sighed the woman. Well, play family. You'll figure it out soon enough. Taylor smiled indulgently. What could this registry clerk know about their feelings? They would never split up. They would be together for life and build the perfect family, the kind their parents never had. But the woman at the registry office was prophetic. She must have had a good eye. After all, so many couples had been married by a seasoned employee. Taylor just faced the fact. He came home in the evening with Melanie on his arm and announced that they had signed in the morning and would now live in the apartment. Grandma clutched at her heart. Oh, but tried her best to stay calm. Taylor realized later that he shouldn't have done that. Grandma had a bad heart, after all, and she would have supported him anyway. But as it happened, so it happened. He was young, inexperienced, in love. Grandma immediately assembled the table from where she'd just come. It turned out to be a celebratory dinner. The three of them sat up late talking. Grandma, having learned the details of Melanie's life, felt pity for the poor girl. It was obvious that she liked the young wife of her grandson. For about a year, everything was just perfect. Taylor studied, Melanie worked, and helped her grandmother around the house. Everyone seemed to be happy with the way life was turning out. Melanie had almost stopped drinking. Her mother took the news of her only son's marriage, like everything else going on in his life, with indifference. She was about to get married, too. Finally, one of her suitors was ripe for a serious step. It seemed to be a co-worker of her mother's, a man much younger than her. Not Taylor's age, of course, but only about 10 or 12 years older than Taylor and Melanie. They were planning children in the near future. Both of them decided that first they should stand on their feet, establish themselves in their professions, buy a separate home, and then think about heirs. But fate ordered otherwise. About a year after the wedding, Melanie pleased Taylor with the news. There's going to be a baby. Taylor then took the news as another adventure. He was breathless at the thought that he and Melanie would become young parents. It wasn't scary. His grandmother was always there. She'd help, she'd teach him everything. So why worry? They'll manage. The pregnancy didn't go very easily. Melanie didn't feel well, was often hospitalized, and the mom-to-be's temper deteriorated. She became cranky, demanding. She constantly reproached Taylor in something, said that it was boring with him, that he does not earn enough and does not know how to do anything. And Taylor? He suddenly began to realize that his feelings for Melanie were somehow cooling down. His heart no longer beat in the same rhythm when he saw her, and his wife's smile didn't bring the joy it used to. Taylor looked at Melanie with different eyes now. He didn't see a forward-thinking girl, but a person with a lot of bad habits, not the same old bold beauty. Grandmother seemed to notice the cooling of feelings between the young couple. She tried to fix something, talked a lot with Taylor, explaining that pregnancy often becomes a test for both husband and wife. The guy seemed to understand the grandmother and agreed with her, but could not help himself. And Melanie acted as if Taylor was suddenly disgusted with her. Boring, predictable. I can't take it anymore, Melanie said often. Taylor either didn't say anything or answered rudely and walked away. He thought having a baby would change everything. But then Naomi was born, a tiny, confused infant. Grandma could spend hours gazing at her great-granddaughter's crib. And Melanie and Taylor genuinely didn't understand what there was to admire. They named the girl Naomi. That was Melanie's decision. Taylor didn't mind, he didn't care. The child at first did not cause him any feelings. And later his daughter began to irritate him. She cried all the time, had to be soothed. The grandmother focused all her attention on the baby. Therefore, Taylor now had to pour his own tea and heat dinner. as well as dilute the formula for his daughter, since Melanie had no milk. This had to be done at all hours of the day and night. If Naomi started crying during the night, Taylor would get up and dilute the formula, while Grandma tried to soothe this crying creature. Melanie flatly refused to run to the baby on cue, and Taylor was very understanding. Melanie was drawn to her daughter. She probably wasn't ready for motherhood, and having a baby hadn't worked a miracle. Nor did their sense of responsibility to their newborn daughter Naomi. Nor had a caring and loving grandmother stopped it. Taylor was now deeply ashamed of his attitude toward his daughter. She had been unlucky with her parents, both of them. Probably if it wasn't for her grandmother, the child welfare authorities might have taken the girl away from her and Melanie in the first place. Grandmother, she and only she gave Naomi in the first months of her life what every infant needs so much: tender lullabies, tender, warm embraces, unconditional love of a mother. She came one day to meet her granddaughter. She brought, as always, a lot of gifts for Taylor, Melanie, and, of course, Naomi. Taylor watched with jealousy as her mother lovingly rocked the little girl in her arms, looking at her with a tender gaze. It was obvious that the newfound grandmother did not want to put the girl in the crib. And Naomi answered her grandmother in the same way, smiled affectionately, looking faithfully into her eyes. Taylor wondered why the mother, who had not cared about her son all her life, suddenly melted when she took her granddaughter in her arms. Maybe she had grown up, realized her mistakes. But it's too late for that. Taylor was sure he'd never forgive his mother. Mom, of course, went to the capital. Nothing could keep her here. Not even a small, undoubtedly favorite granddaughter. There was work and a young husband waiting at home. But now, after Naomi's birth, her mother often called Taylor, asking about her granddaughter and Melanie, asking him to send photos of the girl. She was in touch with Melanie now, too. Mother-in-law and daughter-in-law corresponded a lot. The mother sent Melanie money for gifts for her granddaughter. Taylor knew what she was spending it on. His wife would run to the local bar and get drunk with the men there. She was bored with a child and an unloving husband. Taylor didn't care at all. Let her go out. The guy didn't feel even a hint of jealousy. He didn't have any feelings for Melanie anymore. Grandma thought Melanie worked at the bar. The grandmother did not communicate with her granddaughter Naomi, cooked for the whole family, cleaned, led the usual way of life. And Taylor? He was planning on leaving this town. He didn't have much time left to study. After graduation, he was going to go to New York, but not to his mother. Taylor wanted to start his own separate life. Let his grandmother, Melanie, and Naomi deal with it however they wanted. He'd still have to pay child support for his daughter. He wouldn't say no. It's a shame, of course, but what can you do? You have to pay for the mistakes of your youth. By the way, Taylor blamed his mother for this mistake of his youth. Well, who else? He was only drawn to Melanie so strongly because they had a lot in common. The mother didn't care about her daughter either. If it weren't for that fact, Taylor wouldn't be in such a hurry to make a big decision. But nothing. Life doesn't end here. Everything is still ahead. True, everything turned out not quite as planned. Fate, it seems, had its own plans for all the participants in this story. One very ordinary autumn morning suddenly did not become a grandmother the closest and dearest person for Taylor. As later said the doctor who arrived at the scene of the tragedy, the old woman did not even have time to notice how she died. She was preparing breakfast in the kitchen, felt dizzy, sat down at the table, and that was it. That's how Melanie found her sitting, leaning back in her chair. Taylor was taking the loss hard. He had fond memories of his grandmother. Melanie looked frightened in general. She kept saying, "What are we going to do without her? What are we going to do now? What are we going to do about Naomi?" A figure skater, Taylor was ready to hit his spouse for all these questions. Melanie saw her grandmother as a helper, a servant, a protector. All she cared about was how they would cope without her grandmother in the household. Of course, her mother arrived with her Liam. He was a good man. He took care of all the funeral and wake issues, organized the farewell. And still Taylor felt dislike for the man. Naomi was the center of attention of her mother Sharon. She hugged the girl, carried her in her arms, and sang songs to her. Taylor could see that the mother was having a hard time, a very hard time. She was genuinely trying to connect with him. As his father's only son, Taylor wasn't going to connect with her. Now that his grandmother was dead, there was nothing keeping him here. The boy dreamed of leaving, starting a new life, leaving the past behind and never remembering it again, to become a completely different person, strong, successful, wealthy. Sharon stayed with her young parents and granddaughter and took an extended leave of absence from work after the funeral. Liam flew to New York. The couple called and texted each other constantly. They couldn't seem to live without each other. Taylor realized that her mother was afraid to entrust her granddaughter to a young, grief-stricken parent. She probably saw her son's indifference to Naomi and Melanie's behavior. Unlike the grandmother, the mother saw that the young mother likes to drink and go out. Yes, Melanie did not hide in front of her, openly talking with suitors on the phone, disappeared for 24 hours with new acquaintances. Taylor also tried not to appear at home, spent a lot of time at the university and with friends. One day his mother gathered all the adults living in the once cozy, but now orphaned apartment for a serious conversation. They sat around the table in the kitchen. Little Naomi was sleeping peacefully in her crib in the bedroom. "I've been living here with you and I've realized a lot of things," her mother began. Melanie tensed and Taylor took on an indifferent look. Was she really going to tell them how to live their lives now? Then Taylor would enjoy reminding her mother of her own behavior. "I have no right to judge you," the woman continued. "I've made a lot of mistakes myself, but it's the child who suffers. She is fragile, defenseless, vulnerable. The girl needs someone significant, responsible, an adult by her side. She's almost a year old. She can't even stand on her feet yet. She needs to be practiced, taken to doctors. She needs help. Can you give her all that right now?" Taylor shook his head no. Handle an infant? It seemed impossible to him then, because Taylor was planning to move to the capital and start a new life. "We can't," Melanie replied. "We can't take care of her right now. We're getting a divorce." Taylor looked at his wife in surprise. No, he was not against it. He was in favor of it. But it was just that they hadn't talked about divorce before. "Really?" the mother asked. Taylor nodded affirmatively. "Well, that's not surprising. You two are living like complete strangers. I've noticed that, of course. Anyway, I have a proposition for you, even Melanie, probably more for you. Don't say no right away. Think it over. Liam and I are going to take Naomi with us. I'll take care of her. I'll take care of her, her development, her medical appointments, her nursing. All you need is a power of attorney for the baby. You each have your own separate lives, studying, working, looking for your soul mates. Each of you can see the girl whenever you want. My and Liam's house is open to you at any time. So when you're back on your feet, will you pick Naomi up when you're ready? Think about it. Consult." "What's there to think about?" Melanie's eyes lit up with joy. "That's a great offer. I'm definitely in. I have just now and work options appear, and kind of a serious relationship is planned." "That's good," smiled Mother. "What do you think?" She looked at Taylor. "I think it's a good idea," the young father nodded. Taylor felt uncomfortable. It seemed to him that his mother was trying to compensate for her failure as a mother. She hadn't raised her son. Now she wanted to go down that road with her granddaughter. On the other hand, what does he care what the mother's motives are? She's taking Naomi and saving her and Melanie a lot of trouble. So you should be happy, not brooding. Especially soon Taylor will leave here and forget this whole story like a bad dream. It didn't go away, of course. Taylor, as he planned, moved to New York after his studies, got a job, rented an apartment. He studied a lot and worked hard, made his way in this life with elbows and teeth. With women, Taylor was now careful, did not allow serious relationships, and even more so the appearance of new children. Then it seemed to him that the worst thing that could happen to him, the birth of a new random baby. So a significant part of his salary went to alimony to a complete stranger and unloved daughter. And if another child comes along, then what is there to live on? About the fate of Melanie, Taylor knew only from the words of his mother. She communicated with her former daughter-in-law, kept in touch with her. Melanie stayed in Chicago, found a job there, remarried, this time to some half-marginalized guy. Well, it's not surprising, given the fate of Melanie's parents. The mother often sent her son pictures of Naomi. The girl was growing up fast. The older she got, the more it was noticeable that the little girl looked a lot like her paternal grandmother, the same big blue eyes, light wavy hair, correct pleasant features. Liam, the mother's young husband, replaced the role of father. In the photo, he was hugging the baby girl, holding her on his shoulders, playing with her, and, judging by the look on the so-called stepfather's face, he was enjoying it. Taylor didn't understand the man. To mess around with someone else's baby and still be happy about it. Naomi had developed some serious health problems. No wonder Melanie hadn't given up her bad habits during pregnancy. Mother and Liam dragged the girl to doctors and hospitals, took turns lying with her in the hospital, fighting for her. Naomi was almost threatened with cerebral palsy. Through the efforts of her mother and stepfather, the diagnosis was not confirmed. They pulled Naomi out, put her back on her feet. Her mother tried to tell her son about the details of her daughter's treatment, but he was frankly uninterested. Taylor couldn't understand himself at the time. What indifference to his own child, he had once blamed his mother for it, and then he had done much worse. Taylor only transferred money to his daughter, but did not want to see Naomi. Sometimes, however, her mother arranged meetings between them. She was clearly trying to arouse Taylor's paternal feelings. They met most often in cafes or children's centers. Mom would bring a pretty dressed-up girl. Naomi looked like a doll, like a little girl from a postcard. She smiled broadly at her father, trustingly took his hand. He automatically communicated with his daughter, but there was no response in his heart. Melanie didn't see the girl either. The mother sent Naomi's photos to her former daughter-in-law, reported on her treatment, told her about her new skills and her growing up, and constantly called Melanie to visit her. And not just Melanie, but her new husband. She did everything to ensure that the connection between the girl and her parents was not interrupted. But the trouble was, the young parents didn't want the child. Both were quite satisfied that the grandmother took the girl to herself. One day before Naomi's 4th birthday, the mother dragged Taylor out for a meeting. She came alone, without the girl, which surprised her grown son a little. "Something wrong?" he asked. "Naomi's a little sick." "Then why are we meeting?" "But let's go shopping and pick out a present for her. She's 4 years old, she understands everything. She's looking forward to the holiday and you, of course. She adores you, you know that. Why don't I just transfer the money like always and you buy what she likes?" "Maybe. You're a father and you should know what she likes too," smiled her mother. "That's why I brought you here. You have to choose and buy the gift yourself. It's important." Taylor shrugged. It was that mother thing again. She was clearly feeling guilty in front of him for her cold childhood. It was very noticeable, and she tried to get closer somehow. She thought it could still be fixed. But still, Taylor went baby shopping with his mom. What was there to do? It was a tedious trek. Her mother smilingly wandered past the shelves of toys and explained to her bored son the difference between dolls and teddy bears. It turns out that Naomi likes certain toys, and to others is completely indifferent. "The little girl loves unicorns," the mother gushed, "and cartoons about them. We watch and read books about them too. And we have a whole carload of stuffed unicorns." Taylor nodded silently, wishing this shopping spree would end. They'd bought Naomi another unicorn for her father to give her on her birthday. "Is that it now?" Taylor asked hopefully. Almost his mother smiled. "Let's go to the jewelry store." Naomi was getting to the jewelry part. Taylor didn't particularly agree with his mother on that point, but he didn't object. In the jewelry department, he immediately noticed the set cute tiny gold earrings in the form of a unicorn and the same pendant on a thin chain. The man, usually indifferent to such things, involuntarily admired the jewelry. His mother caught his gaze. Her eyes lit up with delight. "It's just right. Naomi will love it," she said. "I'm buying this set," Taylor said. "And I'm calling a cab. I gotta run." Yes, of course. Naomi was indeed delighted with the jewelry her father had given her. The little girl in the pretty pink dress threw herself around his neck, as always. Taylor had always been surprised by this. He and Naomi saw each other once every 3 or 4 months at best. But she greeted him every time with such joy, as if the closest person to her didn't exist. Taylor helped her put on her earrings, her necklace and pendant, and gave her a few compliments that made Naomi smile. A surprisingly adorable baby. But being her father was something Taylor didn't know how to do, and probably didn't want to do. Taylor's career was on the upswing. Everything was just as he had once dreamed it would be. He was appreciated, noticed, and promoted at work. Now Taylor had his own apartment in Los Angeles, an expensive, beautiful car, a solid bank account. One day the management sent a promising employee on a long business trip abroad. It was a big step up, not even a step, a leap, a jump. Of course, there was hard work to be done, difficult times. But Taylor has never been intimidated by such difficulties. The man left the country with his mother, and now he hardly communicated with her. Once in a while she sent him a photo of her daughter, and then somehow she stopped talking, disappeared somewhere. Taylor hadn't even noticed it at first. And then, when he realized it, he got a little worried, wondering if something was wrong. It was probably the first time he'd ever dialed his mother himself. There was a completely unfamiliar voice on the phone. It sounded like his mother had been crying recently. "What's going on in there?" Taylor got right to the point. His heart was clutching at him with a bad feeling. "Trouble," the voice replied. "Melanie took Naomi. She had a new life, a new job, a new man. They've gone to some village. This man drinks. So does Melanie." "Well, you scared me," Taylor exhaled. "Nothing happened. It's just a mother taking her daughter away. Be happy and rest. You don't have to deal with a small child anymore." "You don't understand. Naomi is not well there. That man drinks. Melanie too. But why would they have a baby?" "You must have misunderstood something. If they took Naomi, they must be doing well." "No, they're not. They just want child support." "What are you paying for Naomi?" "They took her and her bank card so they wouldn't have to work. And they're on welfare too. Naomi's their livelihood. She's not happy there." At those words, the mother broke down into sobs. Taylor clumsily tried to calm her down, but failed and hung up. The mother was probably right. Naomi had lived these 4+ years at Liam's grandmother's house like a little princess, beautiful dresses, expensive toys, proper nutrition. And then Melanie takes her to a completely different world, some village, a strange man who drinks. But what can you do? Melanie is Naomi's closest relative, her mother. Any court in this country will rule in her favor, so you have to accept the situation. It can't be helped. Taylor, becoming older, wiser, repented for such a decision. How could he? How could he be so indifferent to the fate of his own daughter? He knew that nothing good was waiting for Melanie. The trip lasted several years. Taylor had little contact with her mother, and in general, to be honest, almost did not remember neither about her, nor about her daughter. He didn't have time for that. All his thoughts were occupied with work. Her mother wrote sometimes, telling him that she was talking to Melanie, seeing pictures of Emma. They make the girl look neglected and unhappy. Melanie doesn't let her grandmother see her granddaughter, but she doesn't stop communicating, extorting money from the woman for her daughter until she was almost 5. They ask for a substantial sum for Emma's treatment, or for groceries for her. Taylor had no doubt Melanie is simply using his mother, playing on her feelings. But what could be done? They were all adults, so let them figure it out for themselves. Taylor does what he's supposed to do. He pays child support, and he doesn't care about the rest. The mother tried to terminate Melanie's parental rights. Details of this story Taylor knew partly from the mother herself, partly from acquaintances. She hadn't succeeded. Melanie only got angry, afraid that her only source of income would be taken away from her, and fled in an unknown direction. Contact with her and Emma was cut off. When Taylor returned to America a few years later, his mother begged him to find Emma. She was very worried about the fate of the girl, still attached to the little girl for these 5 years, while she raised her, treated and put her on her feet. "Liam and I tried to look for them, but we're officially nothing to them. They won't listen to us, and we haven't found any trace of them," the mother said. "You're the father. We have to respond to your signal." "Don't worry, they're fine. Don't worry. If anything, they'd let me know," Taylor replied. "And anyway, they don't want to talk to us. You don't have to, if you want to. I'll be married soon, and I'll bring you other grandchildren. I'll have someone to babysit." Mother shook her head sadly. All her thoughts were on Emma, and Taylor was really going to get married. Only now he was sure of his choice. Riley was the woman of his dreams. Smart, beautiful, sensitive, understanding, kind. They met during Taylor's business trip abroad. Riley was vacationing in the same hotel where the man lived. They bumped into each other at the front desk, got to talking, and things started to heat up. Now Taylor couldn't imagine life without her. His heart melted next to Riley. She showed him that not all women, such as Melanie, greedy, mercantile, irresponsible. Riley gave Taylor so much love and warmth that she was finally able to warm him. With her, the man saw the world through completely different eyes. And it was wonderful. Of course, Taylor had immediately admitted to Riley that he was married. They were as honest with each other as possible, and he told her about his daughter. "It's good that you have a daughter. I'll never be able to have kids," Riley admitted. "Well, I told you that. If you don't want to be with me after that, I'll..." "You what?" Taylor exclaimed. "With or without kids. I want to be with you. I want to be with you. You're totally my man. Don't even think about it." So Taylor's words were pure truth. He wanted to be with Riley, to hear her voice, to see her deep eyes. And anyway, back then, he still believed that if you had money, you could cure anything. Riley's infertility would be taken care of. And even if they didn't, he didn't care. Just as long as she was there for him, this wonderful, dear and beloved woman. "Thank you," Riley lowered her eyelashes. "Your daughter? She can come over any time. I'd be happy to have her. I hope we can be friends." See, here's the thing. Taylor had to tell his sweetheart the details of his not-so-pretty story. But he was honest with her, as honest as ever. Time passed. Taylor and Riley lived in a large country house. The man had achieved a lot, became the second person in the company after the owner and director. The family obviously did not need money. The mother was sincerely happy for her son and proud of him. She repeatedly asked Taylor to apologize for the fact that she actually abandoned him as a child, did not engage in the upbringing of the only child. Taylor had long forgiven his mother. He did not hold a grudge against her, but he still did not feel such affection as for his grandmother. The man felt sorry for his mother. She felt guilty before him, before her granddaughter, before the whole world. She was tormented. She was especially worried about Naomi's fate, for there had been no word of her since Melanie, frightened, had taken her daughter and fled in a unknown direction. The older Taylor got, the more he thought about his daughter, how she was doing, where she was and whether she had food, clothes, a clean bed. Thinking of his daughter now, the man sighed heavily. "These vistas, so similar to my native Oregon, have awakened in me a host of memories, both pleasant and painful. Naomi must be 23 years old by now. A very mature young woman. Did she go to school? Does she have a job? Why didn't Melanie ever try to contact me, even to ask me for money for her daughter? She must have known I was rich now." Naomi was alive, at least until she was 18, obviously because Taylor's card was charged monthly for child support. But it's been 5 years since his daughter came of age. Now her father's not involved in her life at all. He could have been, and he would have wanted to be. He has the means now, but the children no longer exist and will no longer exist. Once the supposed appearance of a child was a nightmare for Taylor, now a pipe dream and unattainable. What a wonderful mother Riley would have been, he said sadly. But she wasn't. Taylor had everything now: money, career, respect. He wished he could share it with his daughter. But where would he find her now? And would she forgive a father like that? He, Taylor, when he was Naomi's age, hated his own mother. And she did less wrong to him than he did to his daughter. At least her mother was in her son's life sometimes, giving him gifts. And Taylor was never there for Naomi. Monthly alimony didn't count. Taylor was eager to see what Naomi had become. He was sure she probably needed help, and her father could provide it. The man thought about hiring a private investigator. Have him find Naomi. The only thing stopping him from taking that step was fear. For one thing, the man was afraid of hearing disappointing news. Something he didn't even want to think about. Taylor chased the bad thoughts away, but there was a heavy feeling in his heart. Though perhaps he was making his own head spin. Secondly, Taylor was afraid of Naomi's reaction. His father hadn't been around all his life. And suddenly there was a benefactor who got such a role in his old age. I bet his daughter despises him, maybe even hates him, looks down on him. I passed a small local church, white walls, gilded domes, a beautiful and obviously old building. The man stopped, admiring the structure, and then his gaze fell on a tiny figure on the steps leading to the doors of the temple. It was a girl about 5 years old, modeled, obviously from a dysfunctional family. Big blue eyes looked incredulously from under her headscarf to her eyebrows. In her hands, the little girl held a mug, at the bottom of which a few coins jingled. So much poverty around these days, Taylor thought. It's terrible that such small children have to beg. Where are the adults who are supposed to look after them? And where are the child welfare authorities? The little girl would clearly be better off in an orphanage than on the streets. The man's heart squeezed with acute pity for this crumb. He slowly, so as not to frighten, approached the little girl, threw a few $1,000 bills into her mug. "Is that all for me?" The little girl was amazed. "You," Taylor smiled. The girl, despite her lack of grooming, was a real beauty, healthy, blue-eyed, sweet, with ruddy cheeks. "Thank you, kind man," she said in an old man's way. "What's your name?" Taylor couldn't help himself. "Audrey, what a beautiful name." "Kira, aren't you hungry by any chance?" Instead of answering, the girl lowered her eyes, and Taylor realized that yes, of course, the girl was very hungry. Immediately, he went to the nearest bus stop. There he spotted a bakery stand. Taylor bought a whole bag and, returning to the church, handed it to the little girl. The little girl greedily devoured the treat. Taylor smiled and wanted to go on his way, but suddenly his attention was caught by a pendant that glittered on Kira's neck. The pendant hung on an ordinary dirty rope, but the jewelry itself was exquisite and obviously expensive. A golden unicorn covered in pink enamel. Taylor's heart clenched and his eyes swam. It was the exact same pendant Sharon had once given her daughter Melanie for her 4th birthday. His mother had forced him to go to the jewelry store then, and there the man's gaze had fallen on this magnificence. Taylor remembered exactly what that pendant had looked like, and it was the same one that was now around Kira's neck. Or exactly the same one, which was also possible. And yet, is there such a thing as coincidence? "Where did you get that thing?" the man asked cautiously. "And this pendant was given to me by my mother," simply answered the girl. "Where? Where is your mom now?" Kira looked at Taylor and shrugged. "I don't know, Grandma doesn't say. I ask all the time, though. My mom's been gone a long time. I don't remember her much anymore." "So you live with your grandmother?" "Yes, with my grandmother. Uncle Leo, too. He's bad, he drinks a lot. Uncle Ashton was better. He used to cut out paper dolls for me. You know how beautiful they were, but I lost them already. It's a shame. Uncle Ashton doesn't come anymore. His grandmother kicked him out." Taylor looked into the girl's face and saw her as his mother and daughter. This little girl, she couldn't be Naomi, of course, but she resembled her like 2 drops of water. The daughter had been just as cute and adorable as she was when she was a baby. "All right, goodbye." Taylor smiled at the child. "I'll see you around. I hope to see you if you pass through here. I work here every day." The word work, which sounded so familiarly businesslike from the child's lips, cut Taylor's hearing. He didn't stray far from the girl. Taylor knew he wouldn't be able to live peacefully unless he knew the fate of this little girl on the pendant. Now the man was sure it was exactly the jewelry that he had once presented to his daughter. And Audrey's resemblance to Naomi was no accident. Really, it couldn't be accidental. Taylor took a comfortable vantage point, settled on a bench behind the small chapel. From here he could see the porch and the little girl sitting alone on the steps. People, many people, were passing by the girl. Some ignored the little beggar, others threw a handful of coins into her mug. Some even rubbed Audrey's head or exchanged a few words with her. It was clear that the girl was known here, used to her. Poor child. What does she have to endure? At this age, kids go to daycare, play with their friends, have fun. And this baby stands here all day in the heat and collects pennies, by the way. Served Audrey not bad. You bet, such an angel. Someone profited a lot from the charming appearance of the little girl. Several hours passed. The sun slowly began to roll toward the horizon. When Kevin approached, he was a scowling, short, unkempt man. Not homeless, of course, but clearly a dysfunctional man. Grim types of marginal appearance was the phrase that came to Taylor's mind at the sight of the man. Audrey rushed toward the man, smiled broadly, and gave him a quick assurance. The man listened half-heartedly at first, then suddenly became animated. Audrey pulled a wad of bills out of her pocket, the very money Taylor had given her. The man counted them, shook his head in surprise, and put the money back in his pocket. Then he took Audrey's hand. She trustingly held out her little hand to him, and he led her toward the gate, out of the churchyard. Taylor rushed after them. "Wait," he called out to the man. The man stopped and looked at Taylor questioningly. The man holding the little girl's hand tensed up. "Don't be afraid of me," Taylor asked. "I have something to do with you." The man took a couple steps away, but didn't leave. He looked questioningly at the man who had spoken. "I'm not the police," Taylor said at once. He realized that this man might be afraid of men in uniform, and with good reason most likely. But he couldn't let the man be afraid of him now and run away. "I'd like to offer you money for information." "Are you the one who gave the little one $5 today?" the man asked. "Yes. Why do you want it?" "I'm not sure." But Taylor decided to be frank. "You see, my daughter's missing." "How long ago?" "It's a long story. The baby, she looks just like her. Eyes, hair, lips, every feature. And then there's the pendant. She's wearing a pendant around her neck that I gave my daughter once. I just need to ask you something. You can tell me about the girl's life, and you'll get paid for it. Even if it's a mistake and Audrey has nothing to do with my missing daughter." "You're a strange one, aren't you?" The man shrugged. Audrey had been holding onto his arm the whole time. She looked at Taylor and her escort with curious eyes, as if trying to understand something. "But ask if you must. Just the money up front, in installments," the man warned. Taylor handed him a $1,000 bill and asked the first question. "Say, what's this girl's mom's name?" "I don't know. She lives with her grandmother." "What's the grandmother's name?" "Melanie?" "Melanie. That was my ex-wife's name." Another coincidence, Taylor thought. He handed the man another bill, which he immediately slipped into the back pocket of his jeans. "Well, what's the address? Can you tell me their address? I'd like to see her grandmother, talk to her. I'm pretty sure Audrey is my missing daughter's child. There's no such thing as coincidence, no such thing as chance." "What's an address to say?" The frowning man shrugged his shoulders. "I'm taking the little one home right now. I can show you. But I don't think I'll be able to talk to Melanie. It's late at night. She's probably out of her mind. It's her son Kevin's birthday today, too. He's been running around with a bottle since this morning. I'm sure Melanie had company over at Melanie's. Maybe she still is." The man grinned unpleasantly, as if he'd said something witty. Taylor nodded. The three of them walked a couple blocks and ended up in a cramped old courtyard. There was trash everywhere, swings falling apart, weeds poking up through the asphalt. The houses here were old, wooden, two-story houses. There was a smell of rot in the air. So this was where Audrey's childhood had taken place. The man stepped confidently into one of the entrances, slamming the door loudly. Taylor hurried after him. Audrey finally wrenched her arm from her escort's grasp and rushed up the stairs. On the second floor landing, she pushed the door open. It opened at once. The little girl slipped inside. The man followed her. Without waiting for an invitation, Taylor came in. The apartment was dirty, dusty, dark, old furniture shabby. Wallpaper, plaster falling off. From all corners there was a stench of mustiness and the smell of booze and smoke. "Granny, we're here." Audrey's sonorous voice filled the apartment. "Not your grandmother," came the man's mocking voice. He was already in the far room. Taylor went to that sound. In the center of the hall, the body of a thin, swollen woman with a yellowed face lay directly on the floor. She was singing loudly, spreading the smell of booze. There were empty bottles and ashtrays under the table, and cigarette butts on the windowsill. The man unceremoniously shook the woman by the shoulders. She mumbled something unintelligible. Audrey ran into the room. Seeing her grandmother in such a state, she was neither surprised nor upset. Most likely the little girl contemplated such scenes every day. And it was horrible. "Wake up," I said, shouted in her ear the man. "You have guests." Finally, the woman opened her eyes and looked around the room. When she saw Audrey, the woman smiled stupidly. Suddenly, Taylor came into her field of vision. She was staring at his face, clearly trying to remember something. Taylor recognized her. It was Melanie. There was no doubt about it. Slumped, aged, but Melanie. So Audrey's her granddaughter, which means she's his own granddaughter. The ex-husband is here, Melanie said, smiling unpleasantly. It's been so long since you've been gone, and now here you are. But you're on your own. I don't have time for this. The man hurriedly excused himself. He looked questioningly at Taylor. He kept his eyes on Melanie and took a wad of bills out of his wallet and handed it to the man. Taylor couldn't believe this was really happening. He'd thought about finding his daughter so many times, and he'd been afraid to start looking. And then all of a sudden it just happened all by itself. Strange. Unbelievable. Amazing. Hello, Taylor finally got it out of him. Well, hello, why are you here? How did you find us? You're not going to believe this. I bumped into Audrey by accident. I recognized the necklace. I looked closely, and she looked just like Naomi. I was going to look for her. I was going to hire detectives for my daughter. Why did you disappear? Why didn't you come looking for me? Because of your crazy mom. Melanie looked at Taylor angrily. She wanted to take Naomi away from me. She was going to take away my rights to the baby. So we ran away for good. I'd be better off with Naomi. And me. You didn't think of me. A furious Melanie screamed. What would I do without my only child? And what would I do without child support? I couldn't get a job anywhere. Taylor thought that it seemed that child support was the only reason Melanie was holding on to Naomi so tightly. The ex-wife hadn't even noticed when she'd revealed her true motives for the child support payments. Melanie was living on her own and supporting her roommate. Where's Naomi? Taylor asked. He realized that her daughter was obviously not well. Otherwise Audrey wouldn't be living with her alcoholic grandmother and begging at the church. You don't know anything. Melanie shook her head. No, our Naomi is gone, that's all. She died 2 years ago, along with Kevin. He was just a baby. Taylor shook, his eyes darkening. The terrible truth pressed down on him like a heavy slab. Deep down, the man felt that his daughter was in trouble, sensed it with some sixth sense, but tried to keep the dark thoughts away from him. And now it turned out to be true. Naomi's gone. Nothing could be fixed or changed now. Taylor imagined how his daughter, all 20, which she probably dreamed of, how he would become for her a wonderful, caring father. And then all of a sudden this. You what? Do not get so upset, Melanie said in a conciliatory tone. Taylor must have looked too miserable and lost. His ex-wife had taken pity on him. Taylor obediently sat down on the edge of the couch. Audrey immediately settled down next to him, sweet, bright, full of life and energy. Naomi's daughter, Taylor didn't doubt that now. Melanie seemed almost sobered up. She had told her ex-husband her story coherently enough. Taylor had been on a long business trip abroad when his mother, seeing that Naomi was in danger, had tried to take her granddaughter through the child welfare authorities. She was unsuccessful. The little girl was left with her mother. However, now Melanie's rented apartment was regularly visited by inspectors, and it was tense and frightening. Melanie did not lead an exemplary life. She and her then cohabitant loved noisy, fun company, but did not like to work. Naomi was a great source of funding for the sweet couple. Taylor faithfully transferred to the baby very even decent alimony, and even from the state for the maintenance of the child money came. Beautiful, and all would be well, if not for the mother-in-law and her young husband. Liam thinks he's Naomi's savior. They tried to take the baby away, take her for themselves, and sooner or later they would have succeeded. That's why Melanie and her roommate decided to get away, to hide, to disappear into the vast expanse of the country. In that city, they had nothing to hold them. Their homes were not, work too. So they went to seek happiness in a new place. First they lived in a big town, then in a smaller village. Melanie's roommate and place of residence and friends changed with dizzying speed. Naomi was growing by leaps and bounds, becoming a beautiful young girl. And now she too had suitors. What else could grow up a girl, seeing such an example of her mother, and from an early age surrounded by her dysfunctional friends? Naomi early addicted to alcohol. And it is almost no wonder that she got pregnant by herself, without knowing from whom. She spent the whole 9 months drunk, and even went to the hospital drunk. She wanted to get rid of the baby when she realized she was pregnant. Melanie shared details. Audrey sat next to her and listened attentively. "Maybe we should put the baby in the other room," Taylor suggested cautiously. It seemed to him that this conversation was not for children's ears. "She knows everything." Melanie waved her hand. "Let her know. It's her life, her destiny. She has the right. Not all children are destined to be happy and desirable. What can you do now?" So Naomi didn't manage to get rid of the unwanted pregnancy, but this fact didn't upset her, even perhaps and pleased. The girl had time to realize that the child can be a great source of income, as she was once for her mother. Baby Audrey was born, pretty and surprisingly healthy, especially considering the lifestyle of her mother during pregnancy. The girl was cared for by Melanie and Naomi. Both of them couldn't get enough of the baby. It seemed to both of them that Audrey would not repeat their fate, would break out into the people. It was their hope for a happy future. Naomi, did she ask about her father, about me?" Melanie grinned. "She did, especially as a child. She remembered you and her grandmother for a long time. And then somehow those memories faded away. Only sometimes Emma would tell me dreams of a beautiful life. I guess the memories must have come to her at night." "And what? What did you tell her?" "That's just the way it is. She said you don't need your father for nothing. He bribes her with his compliments and lives in his own pleasure. Doesn't want to know the kid abroad." Taylor opened his mouth to object but stopped himself. Melanie was right. He really was so callous, indifferent, cold. As a young man, Taylor had dreamed of forgetting about Melanie and Naomi like a bad dream and starting a new life. Only with time the man realized how important and valuable it is a daughter. But it was too late. Time passed. Audrey was growing up, Naomi, listening to Melanie's stories about her daughter. Taylor clenched his fists helplessly. His girl, his princess, needed support. It was important for her to feel loved. If he, the father, had been there for Naomi, this disaster wouldn't have happened. When Kevin wasn't even 3, Naomi's then boyfriend went crazy. Melanie continued. "I was asleep. I didn't hear anything. I'd had a few drinks. Then people told me. Our guest said something wrong. She told him, Naomi, our roommate, and he came at her with his fists. The guys tried to pull him away. No way. He's a big, strong guy. They called an ambulance and the police. They took him to jail and her to the hospital. But they didn't save my little girl. I didn't find out until morning." Taylor was silent. It was hard to hear the terrible truth. His heart clenched with pity for his daughter, whom he did not have time to save. "Penelope is a good girl." Melanie looked affectionately at her granddaughter. "She's smart, she's working, she's already helping her grandmother. Thomas is the one who brought you here. He takes her to trade so she can ask people for money. There's a lot of people giving to a pretty girl like her. Thomas usually gives us more than half. Maybe he's lying, I don't know. But it's enough for us. A child shouldn't have to live like this." Taylor finally spoke. His voice sounded hoarse and muffled, like it was coming from underwater. "I know there's no way out," Melanie said. "I have to rent an apartment, I have to pay the bills, or they'll kick me out. I also have to eat every day for me and the child and drink." "And drink," Taylor agreed, but he shuddered as he sobered up. "Melanie, do you love Audrey?" "What kind of question is that? She's the only person in the world I'm related to." "Then you want what's best for her, don't you? I have a proposition for you." A couple minutes later, Taylor had to leave the filthy, squalid apartment in a hurry. He was followed by curses. When Melanie heard Taylor's proposal, she lost her temper. She began to call her ex-husband the last words, not at all embarrassed of the child. Then she went from words to deeds and began to throw at her husband everything that came under her hand. And all this in front of Audrey, who seemed not particularly surprised and certainly not afraid. "You won't get Audrey. Don't get Audrey. Don't get Audrey. Get out of here and don't ever come here again." Taylor realized later that he'd made a mistake. He should have spoken to Melanie more carefully and started not with Audrey, but with her. In a rush of feelings, the man immediately offered to take Audrey away, began to explain how the girl would be good in their family and what prospects awaited her. Melanie's eyes immediately watered with rage. The woman behaved in such a way that Taylor had to leave her apartment. He tried to say that he would not leave Melanie, would put her in a clinic, would help her with money, but she did not listen. Small objects and curses flew at Taylor. The best thing he could do in this situation was to leave. So Taylor left. Back at the hotel, he carefully considered the situation. He was filled with a variety of feelings and emotions. The joy of meeting his tiny granddaughter, the pain of irreparable loss, fear of never seeing the little native man again. Taylor was filled with anxiety for Audrey and for Melanie too. The ex-wife, by the looks of it, was rapidly sliding down the incline. Strangely enough, Taylor was not indifferent to her fate. After all, they had a lot in common. In the morning, the man went to the church, the same one on the steps of which he had met Audrey yesterday. No, Taylor wasn't going to approach the girl. Melanie had probably told her something bad about him yesterday, that she should be afraid and stay away. It was just that the young grandfather wanted another look at his granddaughter, a granddaughter whose fate was now in his hands. Audrey was still just a baby, but with a family she would blossom into a normal, happy child. She had a chance for a happy childhood. There were still so many years ahead of her. Taylor wanted to give her toys and beautiful clothes, to take her all over the world, to show her wonderful places, to surprise, to please, to inspire her. A few hours passed. The sun was already high and Audrey was still gone. Perhaps Melanie was afraid that Taylor would take her granddaughter by force, which was why she hadn't let the little girl go outside today. Or maybe frowning Thomas had taken Audrey to a new place for the same reason. Taylor realized there was nothing more to wait for and left his observation post. He wandered around town in great excitement, passing Melanie's house several times. It would be so easy to go to her now, to see little Audrey again. But repeated visits might frighten Melanie very much. Then she would take Audrey away, as Naomi had once done, and flee in an unknown direction. You'll be looking for them like the wind. Toward evening, Taylor took up an observation post in the dreary, familiar courtyard. He hid in the gazebo opposite the entrance to Melanie's apartment. Some time passed and he saw her, his ex-wife, unaware that she was being watched. She was walking down the street with a wrinkled, swollen woman, swollen from heavy libations. Apparently with a friend, the ladies were talking loudly and laughing horse laughter, obviously tipsy. At the sight of the couple, Taylor experienced contradictory feelings. On the one hand, Melanie was here and didn't seem to be going anywhere. Who knows? Maybe she had already forgotten about her ex-husband's visit and his proposal. On the other hand, Taylor was getting very uneasy at the thought of little Audrey seeing people like that around her all the time. She is like a sponge, absorbs everything, those curious eyes greedily looking at the world, looking for an example to follow. The girl must be rescued immediately. Not only is she in physical danger, but also her psychological state is at risk. Melanie herself goes to the bottom and pulls the child with her. Taylor decides to take his time. He will return to Los Angeles and talk to the mother. The mother severely experienced the breakup with Naomi, cried, could not find a place. She and Liam then even wanted to take the baby from the orphanage. It didn't work out for some formal reasons. Either there weren't enough square meters at that moment, or the age of the future foster mother confused the commission. Taylor didn't remember. He had little interest in what was going on in his mom's life. He was still deeply resentful of her. Because of her childhood, she smoked, showed inattention, and became a much worse father to Naomi. The only thing he could do for his daughter now was to save Audrey. The mother greeted her son, as usual, with a happy smile on her face. Taylor was always pleased to see how happy she was to see him appear. The man got right down to business. He told the mother about the little girl he met by chance outside the church and the unicorn-shaped colony he noticed around her neck. He explained that the girl was living with Melanie, who was a drunk. Described in great detail Audrey, her life and work. Audrey asks for alms, the little girl many people give. She is a real angel. It is difficult to pass by. The girl every day sees walks, hears quarrels. She is in danger, every second in danger. It's scary to imagine what could happen to her there. It's horrible. No, it's wonderful that you finally found them. And amazing. I'm happy to know that I already have a great-granddaughter. To think I'm not even 70 and I'm already a great-grandmother, said the mother. I want to see the baby. We will definitely save her and Naomi. What about Naomi? Why haven't you told me anything about her? Taylor lowered his head. How could he explain to his mother that the granddaughter she thought about every day was no longer alive? She seemed to have figured it out for herself. Tears rolled from the woman's eyes. She had to hold her palm to her mouth to hold back her sobs. Taylor put his arms around her, comforted her, and cried with her. It seemed to be the first moment in the life of a mother and son, when they were so close and needed each other. "We have to get the girl out," the mother finally said, gently pulling Taylor away. "We have to pull ourselves together. You say Melanie threw you out of the house when you hinted that Audrey would be better off with us." "I barely got away," Taylor smiled. He found the scene comical now for some reason, though of course it wasn't funny in this situation. "Take me there, and I'll talk to her. Since she can't see you, I'll find the right words now." "Are you sure?" Taylor looked at his mother questioningly. Melanie had always been strange, and now she was a mess. "It's just dangerous. Even I can't let you go there." "One thing, if it makes you feel better, wait on the landing," the woman smiled. "They were waiting for me at the door. But I'm sure everything will be fine." The very next day, Taylor and his mother went to Melanie's house. The man worried if Melanie still ran away with Audrey. After all, the girl for her inexhaustible source of income, and the baby works, and the state on her allowance transfers. Melanie understands perfectly well that if Taylor applies to the guardianship authorities, he will give the girl. Because the conditions in which the child lives now are simply unacceptable. That's clear to everyone. So how disappointing would it be for Taylor and for the mother if the apartment turned out to be empty? Taylor tried not to think about it. The mother bought a whole bag of beautiful clothes and dolls for her great-granddaughter. Taylor told her that he hadn't seen a single toy in the house. The great-grandmother was confused. The man imagined what joy would bring the girl all these things, if only it was not too late. Taylor found the right street without difficulty. With excitement in his heart, he entered the entryway. His mother, on the other hand, seemed quite calm. She was even smiling. Liam wanted to go with them, offered his help, but his mother said it wasn't required. It was a shame. Right now, Taylor would be more comfortable if he were with him, the calm, judicious stepfather who had once replaced Naomi's father. Even if only for a short time, but the girl was truly happy with him. "This is the apartment," Taylor said, pointing to the right door. He pushed it open, but this time it was locked. Melanie must be afraid of her ex-husband now, because the door hadn't locked before. Or had she taken Audrey and gone somewhere else? He'd go around the corner, asked her mother, and pressed the bell button. The bell didn't work. It must have been broken a long time ago. Then the woman knocked loudly. Taylor obediently stepped around the corner. He couldn't let Melanie see him. Footsteps sounded in the back of the apartment. The door swung open. "What do you want?" Melanie's voice was rough, husky. Taylor exhaled with relief. "She's here. She didn't run away." "I'm from the fund about the raise," came the reply. Taylor realized his mother had come up with the perfect excuse to break into the apartment. Of course, Melanie was interested in the money. And there, inside, his mother would somehow find a way to get through to her ex-sister-in-law. When the door closed, Taylor suddenly felt anxious for his mother. After all, she was all alone in there. Maybe Melanie had company again. He, Taylor, had seen those guests and knew that such people were capable of anything. Taylor moved closer to the door and stood waiting. He thought he would soon hear the swearing, Melanie's outraged screams, the noise, and then of course he would rush to his mother's aid. But contrary to expectation, it was surprisingly quiet. Time passed. Half an hour flew by, then an hour. Silence, stillness, and complete uncertainty. Finally, the apartment door creaked open. "Come in? What's going on in there?" Melanie's voice was hoarse. She spoke in a surprisingly friendly tone. Taylor entered the apartment, uncomprehending. It was just as dirty, just as uncomfortable as the last time he'd been here. There was a strong odor of booze in the rooms. "Where's Audrey?" Taylor asked, looking around. "Working. Out," Melanie answered. "She's out in the yard with the neighborhood kids. She doesn't go to work anymore." "Why not?" But I realized something after we met Melanie's side. Taylor nodded silently. "And the precinct officer warned me several times that Kevin could be taken away from me if this keeps up," she added, sighing sorrowfully. She's my only family. I don't have anyone else. There's Taylor's mother. Melanie gently stroked her shoulder. We're not going to leave you now. We'll help you. We'll cure you. You'll live with us. And with the girl, of course. We talked to your mother, Melanie continued. And she told me the right things, and even apologized for what she wanted to take away from me. And she went to custody. She was right about that, too. If I hadn't been so selfish and given her my daughter, she'd still be alive. Melanie stopped talking and pressed her lips together. Apparently she was barely holding back tears. Taylor's heart at that moment clenched with acute pity for his daughter, whom he had not had time to save, and for his former wife. Melanie clearly blamed herself for what had happened to Naomi, and to be honest, rightly so. Taylor couldn't let go of the responsibility. He too felt very guilty in front of his daughter. There's no going back, the older woman sighed. I probably did the wrong thing back then too. You should have been gentler, more cautious, found a way out that would suit you as Naomi's mother, the older woman sighed. I wanted to take the baby away from you without noticing. I didn't think much about your feelings. We're all good, Taylor summarized. But unfortunately, nothing can be undone. There's no bringing Naomi back. But we can make Audrey's life happy. We can do that. We just have to find the right solution this time. And we already have. Melanie smiled. Her eyes remained inexpressibly sad. All right, Taylor's mother said in a businesslike tone. We're all going to Los Angeles tonight. You and Riley are going to get custody of the girl and take her into your family. I know your wife will support that decision. Taylor smiled. Not only will Riley support the decision, but she'll also be happier than she's ever been in her life. His wife, ironically, can't have children. She's dreaming of having a child. And then suddenly in their family will appear Audrey, a cute, smart, and very sociable girl. She and Riley will make each other happy. That's for sure. Melanie, are you in? Taylor asked. I do. It's what's best for Audrey. What can I give her? Audrey needs you very much. Taylor's mother put her arm around Melanie's shoulders. You've raised her since she was a baby. She loves you. So you're going to have to do the same for your granddaughter. I'm ready. Melanie nodded. That's great. Taylor was filled in on the remaining details of the plan. It turned out that his mother was going to take Melanie in at first. She'd already called Liam. He didn't mind, even volunteered to prepare a room for the guest. But Melanie wouldn't be a guest for long. She'd be traveling for treatment soon. Liam knew the head doctor of a good clinic, so a place at the center was a done deal for Melanie. Are you okay with the treatment? Taylor asked. He was surprised that everything was going so smoothly. The man was ready for a fight, for arguments, for mutual insults. I agree, Melanie nodded. I don't like this life myself. Then the door opened with a bang, and a cheerful Audrey flew into the apartment, flushed from running fast. Despite the fact that the little girl was dressed in an old dress inherited from the grown-up children of the neighbors, she looked gorgeous. The adults admired the little beauty, who in turn looked at the guests with curiosity. I remember you, Audrey smiled, looking at Taylor. You bought me buns at the church and gave me lots and lots of money. Thomas praised me so much afterward. Then the little girl came to her great-grandmother and looked carefully into her smiling and a little confused face. I have never seen you before, but you remind me of someone very much, someone good and kind, Audrey said. It was already happy. Great-grandmother could not hold back her tears. She looks so much like Melanie, wondered the old lady. Amazing. 6 months passed. Audrey lived with the Taylor family. Riley was very fond of the girl and she reciprocated her affection. The man, looking at his wife and granddaughter, quietly rejoiced that this happiness had come to his house. Riley and Audrey walked a lot, played, talked. The woman dressed up the girl like a doll. She taught her important things: to speak beautifully, to dress properly, to eat decently. The little girl grew up in a far from dysfunctional environment. This, of course, left an imprint on her behavior. The girl sometimes expressed herself as a seasoned alcoholic, stashed food for a rainy day, and even sometimes snatched change from the pockets of adults. With this, we had to work hard, and the adults worked. They even consulted a psychologist to make sure they were doing everything right, Slowly, Audrey's behavior improved. After all, by nature she was a very sensitive and kind girl. The little girl learned to grasp everything on the fly. From a wild child, she gradually turned into a little princess. Taylor could not be pleased with his granddaughter. The man realized that these wonderful metamorphoses with the child are mainly due to Riley, and was grateful to his wife for her work and warmth of soul invested in the girl. He himself often spoiled his granddaughter. He wanted to give her gifts. The joyful gleam in Audrey's eyes at the sight of another surprise gave Taylor an incomparable pleasure. Melanie was being treated at Taylor's medical center. He'd already bought her a small apartment near her mother. When Melanie got out, she'd have a place to live. Her mother would look after her, support her. She was genuinely worried about her son's ex-wife and thought that she had behaved wrongly then, many years ago. And who knows what should have been done. According to Melanie's own assurances, she had a new life. The woman now dreamed, planned, saw her own future in bright colors. She even wanted to go to work after treatment. "Of course, I've had a lot of summer," Melanie said, "but I still have a chance to get my life together." Taylor was in agreement with his ex-wife and even found for her a suitable place and the position of a check room attendant in the concert hall. The work is not difficult, even interesting. "Melanie will succeed," was confident Taylor. Melanie had given custody of Audrey to Taylor and Riley. "Can you do better?" "I didn't do any better. I made Audrey's life a nightmare. I realize that now. You're going to make her happy and successful. I'll just be a grandmother," Melanie said. Taylor felt happy now. Everything was going exactly as it should. The longing for his daughter Naomi was, of course, forever in his heart. But he'd done everything he could for her, helping her mother, raising her daughter, his granddaughter Audrey. Everything would be all right now. Daniel walked into his office, which had become his home after so many years of working at the hospital. He always felt at home here. Tall shelves along the walls were filled with folders and books. A desk littered with papers rotating. A comfortable armchair, once presented by colleagues on the anniversary. Everything in the office was familiar, calming, and even cozy. Daniel had to spend days at a time here, even overnight. He had a couch in the corner for those occasions. Normally it was piled high with folders and papers, but in the conditions of time pressure they were stacked on the windowsill, and the couch turned into a bed on which you could sleep at least a couple of hours. And the time pressure was not uncommon. Yes, Daniel's work was hard, but interesting, and also incredibly necessary. The man loved his work. Now he was already the head of the neurosurgery department at the regional children's hospital. But he started out as a common surgeon. Daniel remembered the first operation he performed on his own. His heart clenched and his hands were shaking in front of the operating room. He, then a young doctor who had just finished his residency, was afraid to do something wrong. And his hands were also shaking. It seemed then that 7 long years of training had been for nothing. He wouldn't be able to operate. Not the right character. Probably a coward. But in the operating room, the excitement was gone. In front of Daniel lay a patient with whom the anesthesiologist had already worked. An 8-year-old boy who'd been in a car accident with his parents. The adults had scratches, but the kid had a severe head injury. Right now he had a hematoma growing in his head, which, if it is not removed now, will lead to catastrophic consequences, and only he, Daniel, could help the little patient. The young surgeon had the feeling that he knew exactly what to do. Daniel no longer felt anxious. Point by point, a plan of action took shape. The team was waiting for his orders. The boy nodded his head and they began. They worked harmoniously, like a single organism. Everything then went like a textbook. The boy recovered quickly after the operation. Daniel then watched with a smile on his face as the little patient scurried around the hospital corridors with other children. The child had a long, happy life ahead of him. He had so much ahead of him, and it might not have been. It's scary to imagine. Daniel often wondered what if that first time had been a failure. It's not always up to the doctors. Now Daniel had a lot of experience, and he knew for sure. Sometimes seemingly hopeless patients recover. And people with minor illnesses, on the contrary, die. Why this happens is an open question. Perhaps the higher powers have their own plans for each person. What if the boy, the young surgeon's first patient, had not survived? Would Daniel have stayed in surgery then? Probably not. It would have been too big and too serious a blow for him. But I guess fate had it differently. The boy was destined to become a surgeon. Daniel quickly became known as a talented young surgeon. It was flattering, of course, but much more gratifying was the sincere gratitude of recovering young patients and their parents. Looking into these happy eyes, Daniel realized that he did not live in this world for nothing. At such moments, he felt warm and light at heart. Of course, tragedies also happened. Daniel could often foresee the outcome in advance. Each time it knocked him out of his element. But Daniel was well aware that he had done everything he could. The young surgeon preferred to give patients a chance even when other doctors refused them. He took on the most difficult and seemingly hopeless cases. Sometimes he was able to help people. Sometimes, unfortunately, not. But for each of his little patients, Daniel fought to the last, so that he would not be tormented by the annoying, guilt-ridden thought that not all resources had been utilized. Daniel didn't remember every one of his patients. But some of the guys stayed in his memory for some reason. They weren't always some particularly difficult or interesting cases. No, everything was determined more by some personal feelings between doctor and patient during treatment. For example, Daniel always remembered Rebecca. The girl was brought to the hospital from the neighborhood. She was only about 7 years old at the time. Daniel vividly remembered the moment when he first saw her. It was during morning rounds the day after her hospitalization. The patient was in serious condition. The man realized it immediately, even before he saw her ID. Skinny, pale, with bruises under her huge gray eyes. Her arms were as thin as 2 twigs lying on the blanket. Daniel noted the pearlescent polish on the tiny fingernails and smiled to himself. It means that the patient is determined to live and fight, if she cares about her appearance, even in this situation. The girl looked at the doctor with a curious look. She was in an extremely serious condition, and still in her eyes burned a lively and very bright light. "Hello, Rebecca," Daniel said with a smile as he looked at the patient's chart. "What a name. It's a wonderful name, Hope. And it suits this girl just fine. Children are rarely called that nowadays. It's a shame. Good morning." The little girl said hello politely. Her voice is weak, her tongue is a little slurred. The tumor had already affected the speech center. Daniel knew the girl's story briefly. She lived with her parents and younger siblings in a small town. Simple family, not wealthy. 6 months ago, she started complaining of dizziness. Then her mother and father didn't pay much attention to it. They put it all down to the increased workload because Rebecca went to school in September. They thought it was a peculiarity of adaptation. But after a couple of weeks, the girl's condition began to deteriorate. She developed strabismus, her legs began to cramp. Rebecca, who used to be a good student, slipped to poor grades. The parents took the child to the city hospital to see a doctor. Daniel was well aware of the level of medicine in provincial towns: no equipment, no drugs, no decent laboratories. There, Rebecca only lost precious time. The girl was given one diagnosis after another: anemia and genetic disease. In the end, it turned out to be a tumor in the brain and rapidly progressing. The tumor was noticed when it grew to a huge size. By that time, Rebecca could not walk and rarely smiled, although she had been a cheerful child before. But the girl's thirst for life and curiosity had not been lost. Unlike the doctors in the town, the little girl did not even doubt that she would be fine. She and Daniel at the first meeting confidently said that as soon as she recovered, her parents would take her to the sea. She had never seen the sea. That's why she asked Daniel to cure her as soon as possible, so that she could finally go on a trip. Daniel realized, of course, that Rebecca's case was very complicated. The tumor is large, and it's putting pressure on all parts of the brain. Rebecca must be experiencing severe headaches, and if she's not operated on immediately, she'll never see the sea. We can't let that happen. A child longs to walk on the beach, enjoy the warm waves, breathe in the salty, fresh air. Before taking the patient to the operating table, Daniel had to examine her completely. He preferred to know in advance who he was dealing with. It took several days to prepare for the surgery. During this time, Daniel and Rebecca talked every day and became real friends. The man rushed to Rebecca's room every morning, specially arranging his schedule to have a chat with the cheerful patient. The girl was alone in the ward. She was very sociable. Despite her condition, she lacked companions. Daniel tried to keep her company. "I had a dream today," Rebecca shared with her favorite doctor. I was swimming with dolphins. You know, his back is smooth, 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 smooth. I'm holding on to his fin, and he's smiling. In my dream, it took my breath away, thinking that soon I'll see the sea. I'll see dolphins there, won't I? Yes, Daniel nodded. He thought to himself that he would do everything possible to make Rebecca's dream come true. The whole staff loved the girl. How could they not? She was so sincere, open, and very courageously bore the misfortune that fell on her. She obediently took bitter pills and endured pain. Long, not always pleasant diagnostic procedures without a single squeak withstood. Even older children were frightened and cried. But this one behaved like a real hero. She was interested in everything. How do you tell by blood what's wrong with a person? How do you know what's wrong with a person? Why do you have that thing around your neck? $100,000, I think. How do you do surgery on the head? The skull is hard there. Rebecca literally pelted Daniel with questions. Daniel tried to answer each one. He had to choose his words carefully, building a narrative so that the 7-year-old understood. Rebecca greedily caught every word. Her gray eyes burned with genuine curiosity. Daniel's heart sank at the sight of this little thing. Not walking, not even sitting up. A weak voice, a skinny body. What keeps her soul alive? And how much energy, how much curiosity. Incredible girl. One of Rebecca's questions took Daniel by surprise. Why did you decide to become a doctor? How did you come up with that? The man smiled confusedly. Rebecca, without realizing it, brought him back to the past. The hardest, scariest period of his life. Daniel was 14 at the time, and his brother Hugo was 7. The youngest had just started first grade. Just like Rebecca, Daniel adored his little brother. But it wasn't love at first sight. At first, he was jealous of his parents for the baby, which they had brought from the hospital for some reason. The boy then sincerely did not understand his mother and father already have one son. Why do they need someone else? After all, he was a wonderful child, studied perfectly, cleaned his room, obeyed his parents. So why do they need this small creature, gathering all the attention and strength? It pained Daniel to see his mother smile at Hugo's every gesture. Oh, he smiled. Look, honey, Hugo rolled over on his tummy. Hugo is already holding a rattle in his hand. How great is that? Daniel only wrinkled his nose at these enthusiastic exclamations. What's the big deal? So what if he holds a toy? Daniel thought. I won first place in the school relay race, the fastest runner. My parents didn't praise me like that. Daniel shunned his brother. He hated even seeing his tiny face, where his mother could stare at him with a smile for hours. The baby's cries irritated the boy to the core. Daniel, who always liked to spend time in his cozy room with books, even began to walk more. It was better to run around the yard with the boys than to listen to the cries of his newborn brother. It seemed to Daniel then that Hugo had taken away his former happy life, his parents' attention, everything. And then Hugo grew up, and somehow everything changed. Maybe it was the look in his little brother's eyes. As the boy grew older, he began to look at Daniel as if he were a deity. His eyes were full of trust and admiration. Daniel tried to ignore it at first, and then Hugo got upset when his tower of cubes fell apart. And Daniel immediately corrected the situation. He didn't do it out of pity or love for his brother. He just didn't want to hear him cry. Your baby boy threw that look at him again. Daniel even squared his shoulders at him. Hugo clearly thought his older brother was omnipotent. Something had changed since then. Daniel had taken a serious interest in his brother. It turned out that it was great to play with the baby, to help him learn about the world, and at the same time feel strong, smart, and serious. Hugo followed his older brother with his tail, tried to imitate him in everything. And he did not mind. Now he was pleased with such attention. Daniel genuinely liked Hugo. He felt needed and important with him. Hugo had grown up, no longer a frightened little boy. He had become a sharp boy, a lover of backyard soccer, a leader of boy scrimmages, a conqueror of fences and roofs. Daniel was proud of his brother. That's how he turned out to be a lucky, agile, energetic leader among the local kids. Daniel himself had never been like that. Trouble came when he wasn't expecting it. It happened in September, just after Hugo became a first-grade student. His brother didn't like to read and write, but he showed all his talents in physical education. He was even selected for the local basketball team. Daniel knew that to get there, you had to pass a tough selection process, and Hugo handled it with flying colors. It was something to be proud of. "You know, they gave me a uniform." Hugo's eyes shining with excitement, he flew into Daniel's room, clutching a pile of red and white clothes, the coveted uniform. Daniel's heart fluttered with excitement then. Many of his friends wanted to join the team, even specially trained, and no one succeeded. But Hugo was taken right away in the first grade. Handsome. Daniel clapped his brother on the shoulder. He tried to keep his voice low, not to show too much emotion. He was a grown-up, 14 years old. At the end of September, Hugo was already taken to an away competition, although he trained for a short time, but the coach knows better. So the little brother had time to prove himself. His mother didn't want to let him go, as if she sensed something. The father also thought the younger son was too young, but in the end the parents gave in under the pressure of Hugo and his persuasions, which they later regretted more than once. The bus with athletes got into an accident on the highway. Hugo wasn't wearing his seatbelt. He must have buckled up first. The movement did not start until the coach made sure that everyone on the team was seated properly. He was very strict about safety. But then, apparently, the mischievous little brother unbuckled his belt to spin freely in all directions. You have to talk to everyone. That's what Hugo's all about. The accident wasn't too serious. Most of the passengers were only slightly hurt, but Hugo wasn't so lucky. The unbuckled boy flew out of his seat and hit his head hard against the wall. It was said that Hugo didn't even feel a thing. He went straight into a coma. He was taken to the nearest hospital, hooked up to some clever apparatus. The fight for Hugo's life began. Daniel remembered those days well. His parents walked around pale, silent. Mom cried often and constantly called the hospital to see how her son was doing. Daniel wanted to visit his brother, but only his mother or father were allowed in the room, and that was bypassing the rules. He realized that Hugo had been unlucky. The boy had suffered a very serious head injury and was therefore unconscious. Hugo had undergone several surgeries. Each time, Daniel hoped that everything would be all right now. The surgeons seemed to him almost like gods in white coats. But as time went on, Hugo never regained consciousness. Sometimes Daniel heard his parents discussing the situation. His father said in a colorless voice that he should prepare for the worst. His mother, on the other hand, countered, assuring him that everything would be fine. Daniel had so much hope for the doctors. The doctors seemed very smart, serious, almost omnipotent. These people would help Hugo. They would save him. They didn't. That day, my parents didn't come home from the hospital for a long time. And when finally his father almost brought his mother into the apartment, Daniel knew immediately. His parents had obviously both just cried. Mom's eyes were kind of scary. That could only mean one thing: Hugo was gone. It was hard to get used to, much harder than adjusting to his arrival 7 years ago when his parents had changed so much. His father was hardly ever home now, disappearing to work and then going out with friends. He came home drunk, aggressive. The mother stopped noticing anything around her. She no longer cooked delicious lunches and dinners for the family, was not interested in Daniel's success at school. She didn't even watch her favorite TV shows. His mother lived as if she were a machine, serving some heavy duty. Daniel felt almost physical pain at not being able to talk to his brother, to look into his curious blue eyes. He wanted to talk about it with someone, but his friends wouldn't understand, that was for sure. His father was always away somewhere, and his mother never noticed anything. So he had to deal with it himself. At first, Daniel was angry at the doctors. Why hadn't they saved his brother? All those years of study, and they couldn't cure the boy. Perhaps Hugo was just unlucky to fall into the hands of these inept doctors. If there had been another doctor, a normal one, he would have saved Hugo. The anger in the teenager's heart was growing, gaining strength. Why should his whole family suffer so much because of some lazy and inept doctor? One day, Daniel couldn't stand it any longer. He went to the hospital. He went to the surgeon who operated on his brother. The guy himself did not know what exactly he needed from this man, but his soul demanded action. The teenager flew into the office on the second floor and saw in front of him a tired old man with eyes red from lack of sleep. "What do you want, young man?" he asked him politely. Daniel told him everything, without hesitation. He told him about his pain and his anger. The boy thought that the doctor would kick him out of the office at the beginning of his fiery tirade. But this man listened without interrupting, looked at the visitor with attentive and very sad eyes. Of course, I remember Hugo. He had a bad case. His brain was badly damaged. We did everything we could. We fought for young life to the last, and the doctor began to explain to the 14-year-old the details of Hugo's condition, telling him something about the structure of the human brain. Daniel listened with his mouth open. Now he understood a lot of things. Hugo had had almost no chance at first, unlucky in the fall. But the doctors had fought for him anyway, operating, watching, supporting him. The doctor even showed Daniel pictures of Hugo and other patients, so that the boy realized everything, saw everything for himself. And the teenager listened, asked questions. Now he knew and understood a lot of things. It was after that conversation with the doctor that the boy decided that he would definitely become a surgeon, perform brain surgeries and save people. And of course, Daniel will invent a means or method to help even such difficult patients as Hugo. Now Daniel was reading a lot again books on anatomy. The new world attracted him, drew him in more and more. His parents were not particularly supportive of their son's hobby. They didn't seem to notice Daniel at all. Each was immersed in his own emotions, and each saved himself in his own way. The father went into a world of fun. Now he drank often, he had new friends. Daniel understood that in noisy companies, his parent tried to hide from the grief that fell on their family. But nothing worked, because the morning with a hangover came the realization of irreparable misfortune. The mother became indifferent from the resolved tragedy. She experienced everything inside, sometimes crying, sometimes snapping at Daniel because of some trifle. The teenager did not snap back, he understood everything. It would seem that having lost one son, mother and father should have focused all their attention on the remaining one, but both suddenly became completely indifferent to Daniel. He himself enrolled in courses at the medical university, himself learned the conditions of admission to the capital's medical academy, beat out a hostel, looking for tutors. Everything worked out for Daniel. He entered, moved to New York, began to study, then to work. His parents seemed pleased with his success, but both still hadn't gotten over their grief. Even years later, nothing had changed in that regard. Almost nothing. Daniel had tried to get his parents to see a good therapist. Now that he had connections in the medical world, he knew exactly who would help his mother and father. But they refused and said there was nothing wrong with them. You can't take them to Nicholas. It's a voluntary thing. Daniel didn't tell little Rebecca any of this, of course. But she waited for an answer to her question, wondering why Daniel had chosen to become a doctor. But I really wanted to help little children, the man finally said. That was partly true. Like you, I want you to run and jump again. You like to go crazy, don't you? Daniel asked. Rebecca smiled. You bet I do. When will I be able to walk? The first thing I'm going to do is have a big frenzy of yelling, jumping, and catching up. That's a great plan. Daniel approved. Just don't forget to invite me. Daniel promised Rebecca she'd be fine. What else could he say when she asked directly? But the truth was, she was in a bad place. Very bad. The outlook was pretty dim. To the girl's parents, Daniel had told the truth, explained that anything could happen. They should be aware of all the risks when they signed the consent for the operation. They listened to the predictions about their daughter's condition calmly. No tears, no hysterics, no threats, no aggression. It happens to parents of difficult patients. And Daniel understands those mothers and fathers. He stormed into a doctor's office years ago in a rage. People who lose or have lost a loved one always want to blame someone. But Rebecca's parents were holding up well. You could see that they were in pain, scared, worried, but they also believed in good things. Very much so. They're nice young people, simple, handsome, clearly adoring their eldest daughter. You see, things can go wrong on the operating table, Daniel warned. It's a big tumor. It's affecting many parts of the brain. It's a big risk. But if we don't operate soon, Rebecca doesn't stand a chance. We agree, said the girl's father, squeezing his wife's hand. She nodded. Everyone except you has refused the operation. At least you'll have a chance. I'll do everything I can, Daniel promised. And he did do everything he could. He gave it his all. However, as always, the man was a little worried that his personal feelings for the girl would somehow interfere with the operation. But no, in the operating room he again turned into a surgeon, focused solely on the problem. The tumor was even bigger than it looked on the scans. Or it had grown even bigger in the 24 hours before surgery. Daniel worked carefully, taking care not to touch healthy parts of the brain. Difficult tasks always mobilized him, pulled him up. That's what happened this time. Rebecca's tumor was a challenge for Daniel, and he rose to the challenge. He removed the tumor without a trace, masterfully bypassing all the difficult areas. He did everything he could. Now all that was left to do was wait. Rebecca would definitely live. But what kind of life? Did the operation damage any parts of the brain, or disrupt any important functions? That would be clear once the girl was out of anesthesia. The night after the operation, Daniel stayed on duty. First, he spent a few hours sorting out paperwork. Then he lay down on the couch to get some rest. He was awakened by a cautious knock on the door. "Rebecca's awake," the nurse said. "You told me to tell you right away." "So I did." "Thank you," Daniel nodded. He tried to stay calm, though his heart was pounding in his chest like a trapped bird. "I'll be right there." The man tried hard not to run, just to walk with a wide, sweeping stride. What would he see now? On the bed was the same Rebecca as before the operation. Daniel recognized her immediately in those curious looks and exhaled a sigh of relief. Brain surgery often changes people beyond recognition, and some are even profoundly disabled. There's nothing wrong with the girl's personality. You can see it in the look in her eyes. Daniel smiled at Rebecca with his eyes wide open. The girl certainly didn't look like much. Her head bandaged, half her face bruised under her eyes, her lips dry, her neck cut off. It's a good thing her parents can't see her like that right now. But it was all temporary. Danielle knew that as well as anyone. In a couple days, Rebecca's cheeks would turn pink, the bruises would fade. Her skinny arms and legs would be strong. "Well, kid, you're a real hero," Daniel said with a smile, sitting down on the edge of her bed. "No, you're the hero," quietly and hoarsely replied the girl. "You saved me. I know, they told me." Daniel grinned and stroked her hand. Then he asked the usual questions. Did she have a headache? Were her eyes watering? Rebecca answered, her tongue no longer slurred. Rebecca was still very weak, but it was only temporary. Daniel imagined telling her parents in the morning that their little girl would be fine now. He didn't dare disturb them now at night. Night calls from the hospital could be immediately taken as a bad sign. The man didn't want the parents to think for even a brief moment that the worst had happened to their little girl. Rebecca was indeed on the mend. She grew stronger by leaps and bounds. Only 3 days after the operation, the girl was already standing up. How happy she was to be able to move again. Rebecca had to spend several months in bed. And now the freedom of movement is available again. Isn't it a miracle? Shared her joy with Daniel. I can run, jump, dance. And when my mom and dad take me to the sea, I will learn to swim there and maybe even swim with a dolphin, like in my dream. Remember? I didn't tell you. I dreamt about a dolphin then too. During the anesthesia, I wasn't even the least bit scared with him. That's the gas. Daniel rejoiced. Be careful though. Don't run fast. You can't do that yet. No way, the girl argued. Your corridors are so long and wide. It's like they're made for running. And Rebecca did. She made friends with the kids from the other wards, became their little leader. Daniel gave her a little scolding, just to be on the safe side. It was actually good for Rebecca, moderate exercise. It made her heal faster. After the operation, Rebecca needed to develop her fingers. The usual children's activities, such as molding, making crafts and appliques, were perfect for this. When Daniel told her parents about it, they immediately bought her daughter different materials: cardboard, scissors, plasticine, glue, and paints. Now Rebecca was creating a lot. Passing by her room, Daniel often caught her creating another masterpiece she began to draw. Every day she got better and better at it. Rebecca's fine motor skills were improving by leaps and bounds. Daniel couldn't get enough of her. This child had a minimal chance of living, much less a full life. All the doctors had given up on her. But he took a chance. And what was the result? Rebecca will live, grow up, have children of her own. It's a miracle. Such cases gave Daniel the strength to continue working and to endure failures, which although not often but still happened in his practice. Some patients were impossible to help. Daniel took each loss to heart, even though it was unprofessional. So stories similar to Rebecca's sustained, encouraged, and inspired him. Rebecca's discharge was approaching. It was May, and the lilacs and cherry bloomed in the hospital garden. Daniel tried to keep the windows open to enjoy the pleasant scent of the delicate spring flowers. That morning, 3 people entered his office for a discharge, a radiant man and woman, and Rebecca. The girl looked a little sad. "I'm going to miss you," she said, glancing at her doctor. "We have been such friends, and now we have to part. It's sad." "I'll miss you," too, Daniel admitted. Rebecca's words touched him, filled his heart with warmth. "But it's better if you don't go to doctors too much in the future." "Doctors are the best people," Rebecca said fervently. Daniel smiled. Then his attention turned to the girl's parents. He explained to them what to do next, how to rehabilitate their daughter, when to have her examined, just in case. Rebecca's father listened attentively, and her mother wrote everything down in a notebook. The girl herself was looking around curiously. It was the first time she was in a doctor's office. She was especially interested in the anatomical posters on the walls. "Let's say goodbye," Daniel smiled as he finished talking to the parents of the little patient. "Oh, I have a present for you." The girl realized and took out a small cardboard box from her purse, glued with shiny foil and decorated with tiny roses made of red paper. "What a beauty," Daniel marveled. He was really impressed with the creation he had found. Rebecca's fine motor skills were excellent. Not everyone could build such a masterpiece. It's amazing how quickly she recovered. "I made it for you," Rebecca admitted. "It took me 3 hours. Do you like it?" Daniel nodded very seriously. "This box will have a place of honor in my collection. Look at it." With these words, the man walked over to the shelves by the window. There, on the top shelf, he had his own museum. Rebecca was not the first little patient to thank the doctor with a gift made with her own hands. Daniel was good with children, so he already had a whole collection. The man did not throw away the children's creations. He kept them carefully. The little patients tried so hard to please him. These cute things had a special energy. Daniel placed Rebecca's box in the center of the room. "Wow, what talented children you have here," Rebecca said with sincere admiration. Danielle smiled. This girl saw the beauty in everything and at her age could not envy the skills of others, but admire them. Amazing person. "Well, good luck to you." Daniel smiled goodbye. "We'll see each other again sometime," Rebecca promised. "Better not," Danielle said as the door closed behind the girl. If they saw each other again, it would mean only one thing: the disease had returned. And Daniel didn't want that to happen. But he and Rebecca had met. And it was under the strangest of circumstances. Years ago, looking at the skinny girl with pigtails, Daniel had never imagined how fate would bring them together again. Now the man found the small box with his eyes. The one Rebecca had given him as a parting gift. There it was, all shiny and bright. The man had stared at it many times, remembering his little patient, but he had never once thought to look inside the box. It had never even occurred to him. Now he intended to do so as soon as possible. It's been 20 years since Rebecca was discharged. A lot had happened in Daniel's life in that time, both good and bad. The man lost both of his parents in the same year. His father died of cheap alcohol poisoning. He'd completely collapsed by then. Whether or not his mother helped him keep his humanity somehow. Daniel tried many times to treat his parent, put him in the hospital. It was all in vain. Doctors are powerless if the patient doesn't want to get better. And his mother had a heart attack shortly after her husband's funeral. Daniel realized that both parents had not coped with the loss. Neither had been able to move on with their lives, and he himself had not helped them. Daniel himself believed it was his job that pulled him through. Every child's life he saved, he mentally dedicated to his brother Hugo. That must have been why the confidence lived in the man. Hugo hadn't lived long, but he hadn't come into this world for nothing. Thanks to what had happened to his brother, Daniel had entered the profession and was now treating children. This thought was very supportive to the man. His father and mother had no such support. Daniel felt the loss of his parents very hard, even if they did not communicate much. But the man always knew there are people who love him, always waiting for him, proud of him. To remain suddenly completely alone in this world. A grown man was not ready for this. During this difficult period in Daniel's life, Carolyn appeared. They met by chance. They were in the same company at the anniversary of Daniel's colleague. The celebration was held in a restaurant. Luxuriously served tables, live music, dressed-up guests, light, pleasant atmosphere. Daniel immediately noticed her, a tall, slender young woman with sad eyes. She sat in the far corner of the long table and looked. It was hard to describe, a look that couldn't leave Daniel indifferent. Long, wavy hair, thin hands with graceful fingers, high cheekbones, and for some reason sad eyes. He wanted to unravel the mystery of this silent beauty. What is she sad about, and why is she sad? Somehow he was immediately drawn to her. Gaining courage, Daniel asked the girl to dance. So Carolyn said yes. She even seemed pleased. It was during this dance that they met. The girl's name was Carolyn. She was a cousin of the Jubilee, Daniel's colleague. The young beauty worked as a labor economist for a large oil company. She also liked the same movies as Daniel and listened to the same bands as he did. They turned out to have a lot in common. A love of traveling, a love of classical music, a desire to live somewhere in the country. Anyway, Daniel and Carolyn left the restaurant together. They wandered around the city, sat in cafes, wandered into nightclubs and talked. They got to know each other more and more. Soon they both realized they couldn't live without each other anymore. Daniel never thought that he would have such a person, understanding, sensitive, loving. Someone who could detect the slightest change in his mood, who knew how to cheer him up in any situation. Happiness in the form of Carolyn had come upon him quite unexpectedly. Just holding Carolyn's hand, looking into her eyes, seeing her beautiful warm smile, it was enough to make Daniel feel completely happy. Daniel, of course, solved the mystery of the girl's sad eyes on the anniversary. Luckily for him, she had broken up with a young man just the day before, and they were already getting ready to get married. Carolyn caught the groom with someone else. The guy turned out to be a womanizer. Lucky it all came out before the wedding. That's why Carolyn was sad at her brother's anniversary party. After hearing this story, Daniel mentally thanked fate for such a gift. He and Carolyn married, moved to the country, as they had once wanted to. They bought a wonderful house with a large garden. There were no noisy roads or crowds of people rushing about. Here you could really rest and relax after work. Yes, it took a little longer to get there, but it was worth it. There were many rooms in the house. 3 of them the couple planned to give for children. Both dreamed of a large family and even had no doubt that they would have at least 3 heirs. And there as it goes. With the addition to the family, the couple decided not to delay. Both were ready for children, both already established in the career. It was the right time to become parents. Only in the first year of planning a baby, nothing worked out. The couple didn't worry at the time. They knew that it happens. They enjoyed each other, the new house, made plans, dreamed, talked a lot about the future. It seemed that just a little bit more and a miracle would happen. How could it not? But it didn't. The miracle did not happen next year or in another year. Of course, the couple went to the doctors. Of course, Daniel got an appointment with the best fertility specialists. Both spouses underwent a thorough examination. Everything turned out to be fine with the father-to-be. Carolyn, on the other hand, was found to have serious reproductive problems. They did not threaten or interfere in any way, but they were an obstacle on the way to the cherished motherhood. And so began years of treatment. Carolyn obediently followed all the doctor's prescriptions, did not miss appointments, drank medicines, endured painful manipulations and unpleasant examinations. She did everything so that the children's rooms in their home would not be empty. And still nothing worked. Daniel felt sorry for Carolyn. She took every failure so hard. At first she was hopeful, almost certain of success, flying on wings. Then bitter disappointment, tears, despondency. And so it goes on and on and on. Will you stop it? One day Daniel had a serious talk with his wife. You're exhausting yourself, wasting time and nerves, ruining your health. I love you. I don't want you to suffer. Let's live for ourselves, for each other. I love you too. Carolyn smiled sadly. And that's why I'm going to give you a son. You'll see, everything will work out. I have a special feeling. Daniel sighed heavily then. He tried once again to convince his wife that he didn't have to suffer and agonize because of him, that Carolyn herself was important to him. It doesn't matter if she has a baby or not. Everything will be fine. Carolyn shook her head. We'll have a baby soon. I'm sure of it. Carolyn was right. I guess she did have a keen intuition. A couple months after that conversation, a miracle happened. Daniel vividly remembered the morning Carolyn told him the good news. The pregnancy test had come back positive. How happy were the eyes of the expectant mom. Daniel was breathless at her words, and suddenly tears welled up in his eyes. Was their dream almost coming true? As a doctor, Daniel was aware of the risks. Not all pregnancies end with the birth of a baby. There was still a long and difficult road ahead, especially with Carolyn's health not in good shape. But they had a chance, and it's a good one. Finally, the pregnancy is proving to be a real challenge. Carolyn almost lost the baby several times at different stages. She had to go into labor and delivery every now and then. Carolyn didn't complain, followed all the doctor's recommendations, and took care of herself like a crystal vase. What an anxious, exciting period it was. Carolyn had many ultrasounds, so it became known early on that she was expecting a boy. I told you I was going to give you a son. Carolyn rejoiced. And then 2 more daughters. We have 3 nurseries. The threat persisted throughout the pregnancy. The baby seemed to be progressing well. The problem was Carolyn's health. She was getting worse and worse. The body coped poorly with the load and now and then wanted to get rid of the woman from the impossible burden. The doctors kept the pregnancy alive. Daniel, as much as he could, tried to support his wife. All in all, it was hard on everyone. Of course, Carolyn was the one who suffered the most, but she did not complain about anything, did not regret. The woman knew what all this suffering was for. For the sake of the child, Carolyn was ready to endure anything. The labor began much earlier than the due date. Good thing Carolyn was in the hospital at the time. Everything happened rapidly. The baby was born very weak and was immediately placed in a cuvette. There was no prognosis. It was 50/50 whether he would survive or not. Carolyn demanded more precise information from the doctors, but Daniel knew. He himself had often been in such a situation, when everything depended on something unknown, unexplored. Now he suddenly found himself in the role of a parent like the ones he often dealt with, helpless, confused. An anxious boy named Justin after his ailing paternal grandfather. He was weak, too, they say, born prematurely. They nursed him on the stove. Nobody believed he'd make it, but he did. Not only did he survive, but he became a tall, strong, powerful man. But little Justin wasn't doing so well. At first he couldn't breathe. His lungs hadn't matured. When that problem was corrected, serious vision abnormalities were discovered. The boy was in danger of going blind. Daniel got everyone he knew on their feet. The child was operated on at the best ophthalmology center in the country. He seemed to be fine. Justin lived in the hospital the whole time. They wouldn't let him go home. He had to be under constant medical supervision. Carolyn and Danielle visited him often. The baby was growing up, looking more and more like a normal baby, a cute baby with chubby cheeks and curious eyes. When Justin was discharged in the 6th month of his life, the couple had a celebration. They didn't invite anyone. They celebrated together, sitting in the living room, drinking wine. Little Justin was snoring peacefully in his nursery, which had waited so long for an owner. Carolyn and Danielle talked about their son's future, made plans. Finally, the threat to their baby's life and serious health problems had passed. No, of course, Justin was far behind his peers who were born on time. But he can see. He'll soon be walking, then talking. When the baby was first born, doctors immediately prepared the parents for the worst. Justin might not survive and could be left profoundly disabled. On the background of such prospects, minor health problems seemed a trifle. We can't all be superheroes. I think our Justin will be smart, Carolyn speculated about her son's future. His eyes are so attentive, studying. It's as if he already understands everything. Daniel smiled. He didn't notice anything like that. A child is just a child. The main thing is that it is alive and relatively healthy. But he didn't want to upset his wife. All the more, who knows, maybe she was right. Life went on as usual. Daniel worked hard. The number of patients, unfortunately, did not decrease. Every day, children from all over the country needed the help of an experienced neurosurgeon. Carolyn was busy at home, cooking mind-blowing dishes, recipes for which she found on the internet, creating coziness in the rooms. Daniel returned to his family nest with great joy every time. Dizzying aromas from the kitchen. Cleanliness and order. Around here, you'd miss it. A wife and a son. That's happiness. It wasn't so easy with Justin, though. The effects of prematurity continued to manifest themselves. The boy was often sick, and not like other children, a temperature for a couple of days and again jumps like a young goat. No, Justin was hospitalized 5 times before the age of 3 with pneumonia. His son grew up weak, pale, and sickly. Sometimes Daniel's heart ached with pity and tenderness when he saw Justin. He was fragile, vulnerable. Justin quickly grew tired of playing with his friends on the playground. The other kids were running around the square, having noisy battles, laughing a lot. Justin was eager to be part of this fun group, and the children were happy to welcome him. Justin was a wonderful guy, smart, kind, sensitive. Such are usually loved in teams. But the boy's battery quickly ran out, and he returned to his mother or father on the bench. So in sat the kid until the end of the walk, looking longingly at the merry peers. It was a sad sight. But Daniel was sure Justin would get over it. After all, he was the one who had to overcome a lot of things right after he was born. He'd get over it too. Sometimes Daniel and Carolyn talked about having a second child. After all, they had both originally planned a large family. But now, looking at Justin, they were afraid. At least their son wasn't disabled. And how many risks were there if things got worse the second time around? And Carolyn could hardly endure the pregnancy. She herself was on the verge of death many times. The couple was scared. They were afraid of repeating the story with a more severe outcome, and therefore did not hurry to plan a second child. Carolyn often went with Justin to clinics and rehabilitation centers. The baby needed a lot of attention and care more than healthy children. The boy was engaged in a variety of specialists, sports coaches, homeopaths, early development experts. The results, of course, there were, especially in terms of mental abilities. At the age of 3, Justin was already slowly reading and quite fluently operated with numbers within 5. A little genius, that's what his acquaintances jokingly called Justin. Daniel was proud of his son's progress. It turned out to be such a joy when your child succeeds in something. But physically, Justin was still very weak. He couldn't even go to daycare because he picked up infections so quickly. And that was troubling. Daniel chased the bad thoughts away, reassured himself that the child was under the control of doctors, and they found nothing serious. Or maybe someone had a bad feeling about Daniel. How many children had he seen in his life? Hundreds of little patients had passed through his hands, and the man had learned to distinguish strong, promising kids with good potential from the troubled ones. Unfortunately, Justin fell into the latter category. Daniel didn't share his suspicions with his wife. She was worried enough as it was. Maybe she sensed something too. Trouble came on New Year's Eve. Justin took a little longer than usual to walk with his mother on the slide, which was built in the center of their cottage village. The weather was warm, and snow was falling in large flakes from the sky. It was beautiful. The scenery was like a Christmas card. Justin still didn't want to go home. Carolyn went along with him and let him go out in the snow with the neighborhood kids. The boy, as always, quickly tired and sat down on a bench closer to his mother. But he still refused to come back. He sat with a smile, watching his peers, who began to build a snow fortress. And then the boy didn't have the strength to go home. Carolyn, as always, carried him to the porch in her arms. Justin was only 3.5 years old, yet he weighed probably as much as 2 one-year-olds. By late afternoon, the boy had a fever. He must have sweated while playing on the slide and then frozen on the bench. Carolyn called a doctor right away. He examined the child, prescribed medication, and told her to keep an eye on him. By morning, it was obvious that hospitalization was unavoidable. Justin was burning up. The antipyretics weren't working. Daniel called an ambulance, which took Carolyn and Justin away. The man himself followed them in his car. From the emergency room, the boy was taken up to the intensive care unit. The parents were released to go home. Carolyn cried all the way home, berating herself. We should have brought him home right away, but he was begging for us to stay. I let a 3-year-old get in the way. It's all my fault. Daniel tried unsuccessfully to calm his wife, but he was not very successful. Justin was again diagnosed with pneumonia, this time bilateral. The baby was in intensive care in critical condition. Again, Danielle and Carolyn lay awake at night, startled by every phone call. What if it was from the hospital? Carolyn didn't know everything. Since Danielle, using her connections, had asked the attending physician not to fill her in on the frightening details. Justin was between life and death. He was hooked up to machines, treated with powerful medications. The hope that the boy would survive was fading by the day. Secretly from his wife, Daniel went out to prominent professors, consulted even with foreign colleagues, looking for salvation for his son. It was hard to go through it all alone. But telling Carolyn that Justin was in critical condition was not an option. The treatment helped. Justin was slowly on the mend. Danielle exhaled. The baby still remained in the NICU, but his life was now out of danger. The crisis had passed. True, the serious illness plus intensive treatment had not gone away. Justin was once again cured of pneumonia, but the price was an acquired heart defect. Many of the drugs the boy was given had side effects. At that time, there was no opportunity to think about the potential harm of treatment, just to get the child out. Now the consequences have taken their toll. And they have. Justin had become a cardiologist on top of all his other problems. So much trouble for one small, skinny little boy, not even 4 years old. The kid was constantly examined. Doctors kept the situation under control. But Justin's condition was becoming increasingly critical. The disease was progressing rapidly. Carolyn was at first relieved when the threat to her only child's life was over. But a new problem again initially threw the anxious mother off balance. The doctor's prognosis sounded almost like a verdict. Justin was getting worse and worse. Then the woman pulled herself together for her son. Daniel marveled at his wife's resilience. She had to stay with Justin in hospitals, watch him, follow the numerous recommendations of doctors' physical activity, pills by the hour, constant monitoring of indicators, and so on. These worries and a rigid, busy schedule distracted Carolyn from depressing thoughts, gave strength to go on and fight for her son. Fortunately, the woman didn't know the whole truth. And the truth was this: Justin needed a complex, unique, long-term operation. It had been postponed. Carolyn thought it was because of her baby's weakness. He still hadn't fully recovered from the pneumonia. In reality, no surgeon wanted to take on such a patient. Daniel knew that Justin had a high chance of not surviving the long surgery. The man sent copies of his son's medical history to various centers and clinics, including foreign ones. The answer from everywhere was about the same. Daniel realized that without surgery, his son would not last long. He would fade away day by day, and they, the parents, would only have to watch. It was hard to realize this. No one gave an exact date. Maybe a year, maybe even 2, but no more than 5. That is, without surgical intervention, my son will not live even until the end of the 2nd grade. And in general, about school in such a situation, probably will not even have to think about it. The boy's condition will gradually worsen, and eventually he will go to bed. What's school for? But surgery is a huge risk for Justin. It's not a sure thing. On the contrary, it could make the problem worse, bring the end closer. The boy may never wake up from the anesthesia. And the manipulation of a small heart must be carried out at the highest level. No one wanted to take on that responsibility. Daniel was desperate. He was afraid of losing not only his son, but also his wife. If the worst happened to Justin, Carolyn wouldn't be able to bear it. That evening, the man sat in his office. It had been a long shift. He hadn't had a minute all day to sort through the paperwork. And now Daniel was making up for lost time. He didn't hurry home. No one was there anyway. Carolyn was back in the hospital with Justin. The boy needed supportive therapy. Her wife, unlike Daniel, still believed that everything would be all right. She didn't know how things really were. The man often doubted whether he was doing the right thing, hiding the truth from his beloved. But he didn't dare to tell Carolyn everything. The figures in the report jumped in front of his eyes. Daniel could not concentrate. He was exhausted from the day's work, and worrying about his son and wife didn't make him productive. The man decided it was time to call it a day. He would have a cup of coffee before the road, so that his eyes wouldn't slip while driving. Daniel walked to the coffee machine at the far end of the hallway. From a distance, he spotted Franklin, a colleague and longtime friend from the cardiology department. The man had tried to help Daniel in his difficult situation as best he could. He had utilized all his connections. Daniel was grateful for that. Franklin took a wide stride toward Daniel. In his hand, he held a tall glass of steaming Americano. "You're here, aren't you?" Franklin smiled at his friend. "What else you got going on at home?" "That's great." Daniel replied, "I've got great news for you. I thought I'd tell you tomorrow. But now that you're here. Anyway, Justin has a real chance of recovery." Daniel looked at Franklin questioningly. Hope began to rise in the man's soul again. His buddy looked so confident. Confident? Daniel hesitated, forbidding himself to hope. It had happened so many times before. And every time it failed. "There's a young surgeon in Denver," Franklin continued. "She's a cardiologist at the med school. She graduated not too long ago, but she's already gained experience. She works with foreign clinics. She is passionate about research and innovation. It's a mystery when she has time for everything. This lady specializes in children and prefers complex cases. She pulls out patients that other doctors gave up on long ago. And she can do it, can't she?" Daniel was surprised. "So she is a star in the world of medicine. But why don't we know anything about her?" "She's a star, but a rising star," Franklin said confidently. "She's got a lot ahead of her, and it won't be long before everyone knows." "So I contacted her, sent her Justin's story. I didn't even tell you, so you wouldn't get your hopes up because I could see how hard it was for you. But then, just this evening, she sent me a reply. This young luminary is willing to do Justin's surgery. She just needs to meet with you or Carolyn to discuss it in person." Wow. Daniel exhaled, unable to believe his ears. Everyone was giving up on Justin. Would the young doctor be willing to fight for my boy? But I'd have to meet her first, learn more about her practical experience. I don't want to make my son a guinea pig for an up-and-coming star. The cost of making a mistake is too great. "Anyway, you have a meeting the day after tomorrow," Franklin said. "I've already arranged it with the head doctor, so they'll let you go. You'll fly to Denver, you'll sign everything there, and we'll get to know her. It'll all work out." "She's great," Franklin said. "I've heard of her. She's very talented. She's young, but she's got a lot of experience, so don't look at her age." And so, 2 days after that conversation at the coffee machine, Daniel sat in front of the office of Rebecca, the young female surgeon who would save his son. In that time, the man had learned a lot about her, where she studied, where she practiced, what she excelled at. From everything, it appeared that Rebecca was indeed a young talent. She had some very difficult cases in her practice. Daniel had seen pictures of her young, beautiful, more like a photo model than a heart surgeon. And yet Daniel saw something vaguely familiar in the young surgeon's face. She looked a lot like someone, maybe an actress or a singer. Her appearance was very striking, correct facial features, long hair, slender figure. Now Rebecca was on her rounds. According to the staff, she was very attentive to her little patients. Finally, light footsteps were heard at the end of the corridor. Daniel's heart raced with excitement. He saw a silhouette, a young girl in a white coat, walking briskly toward her office. Her hair fluttered, a pencil sticking out behind her ear. As Rebecca approached Daniel, he had a strange feeling again. He'd met this woman somewhere before. The look in her huge gray eyes was painfully familiar. Rebecca smiled kindly at Daniel and invited him into her office. That smile made the man's heart warm. Rebecca was an open, sensitive person. Such people were always easy and pleasant to work with. In the office, Daniel involuntarily looked around. Everything was just like his own, shelves filled with books and files, a desk piled with documents, a couch in the corner, and even a shelf with children's creations. "Good patients?" he asked, nodding at the shelf. "Absolutely," Rebecca smiled. "Why don't you have a seat?" "I brought Justin's medical history." Daniel handed the young doctor a puffy folder with documents and scans. "Your colleague has already mailed everything to me," Rebecca said. "I'm familiar with your situation, and even the treatment plan is ready. I can't say it will be easy, but I think we can manage." It seemed to Daniel that Rebecca's words made the room feel brighter and warmer. She gave him hope. There was a reason this woman had such a wonderful name. I had a similar case with a girl, but she was older than your baby, Rebecca continued. She's fine now. Justin will do everything we can to make this happen. Daniel asked Rebecca questions about his son's treatment that he was very interested in. She answered in detail, thoroughly, thoughtfully. The man quickly realized that she was a professional and innovator. It is such people who move medicine forward. This girl has a great future. She will save more than 100 lives and even more. After all, her techniques and schemes will then be used by other doctors. On top of everything else, Rebecca turned out to be an incredibly nice person. She looked at Daniel with sympathy, tried very hard to support him, to cheer him up. She understood how hard it was for him. When the formal questions and signing of the documents were over, Rebecca suddenly asked the man an unexpected question. "And you? Don't you recognize me at all?" Daniel took a closer look at the young heart surgeon's face. "Those gray eyes of yours. They look very familiar," he admitted. "But I can't remember where we've met before." "I'm not surprised," Rebecca smiled. "It was a long time ago. I was barely 7 years old then. I'm Nadezhda Selivanova, an old patient of yours." "So that's it," Daniel slapped his forehead. "Of course I'm glad you're doing well." "Thanks in part to you," Rebecca smiled. "You saved my life. They didn't even want to take me on, they'd written me off. That's what Dad told me later. And back then, when I was bedridden, my parents assured me that everything would be fine. Although the doctors told them otherwise," Rebecca continued, "they wanted me to believe in the best. It was the right thing to do." Daniel nodded his head. "I remember your parents, too. They're wonderful." The man switched to you in an unnoticeable way. It wasn't a woman surgeon he didn't know well. And Nadia was the same, Nadenka. "I'll do anything to save your son," Rebecca said. "It's amazing what fate has thrown my way. Justin has become my patient. There's a reason for that. I believe in signs. We surgeons are superstitious, the new ones know that." "Yes, that's true," Daniel nodded. "I believe in signs too. That's how fate works. Now I'm in your parents' shoes. What was it like for them? I felt it all. It's scary to imagine. But don't worry, everything will be fine." Organizing Justin's transportation to Nizhny Novgorod took several days. We had to prepare documents, take a lot of tests, conduct another examination. Daniel had a lot of help from all his colleagues. In the end, we managed even faster than we had planned. And now the baby was already in the hospital under the careful supervision of Rebecca. She immediately found a common language with both Justin and Carolyn. Both of them literally fell in love with the smiling young doctor. Rebecca's mere presence gave them confidence and a happy outcome. Daniel never met her again. Rebecca had a lot of work to do. She didn't have time for chit-chat. But they did talk on the phone a few times, discussing the upcoming surgery. The surgery lasted 8 hours. During that time, Danielle and Carolyn were worried sick. First they sat in the hospital, then they wandered around the neighborhood of the medical center. It seems that they sat in a cafe, visited some museum. After a while, the couple couldn't even remember what they did to fill the agonizing hours of waiting. Daniel held Carolyn's hand tightly. Her palm was cold, icy cold, although May had been hot and sunny that year. Daniel was impatient every minute, pulling his cell phone out of his pocket, fiddling with it, flipping through the news feed. He waited for the call. "When the surgery is over, Rebecca will call," she promised, Carolyn said. "Why are you so worried?" "It won't be much longer. My surgeries take longer than that," Daniel tried to reassure her. Carolyn didn't know the risks. Daniel was still taking care of his wife. Finally, the long-awaited call came. "Everything went well," Rebecca's tired voice came through the phone. "It was hard, but we did it. The team was great. Your son is a hero. He'll be fine now. More details tomorrow. I gotta go." Daniel slumped helplessly on the bench. He had a smile on his face, which his wife immediately realized. "Justin is fine," Carolyn said affirmatively. Rebecca had worked a miracle. After the operation, Justin recovered quickly. He was only in the intensive care unit for 2 days, and that was only because of the protocol. Then Carolyn went to the hospital with him. Daniel, the attending physician, had to go back. There were patients waiting for him in the capital. There was a lot of work to do during his absence. Now he would have to spend the night at the clinic. But Daniel was not frightened by the emergency, especially now that Justin was doing well. The boy was looking better. A blush was appearing on his count with each passing day. It was beautiful and very unusual. Daniel was used to seeing his son pale with black eyes. Suddenly, Justin was a rosy-cheeked, bright-eyed baby boy. Carolyn shared Justin's new progress with her husband every day. He's so energetic. He's running around with the children from the neighboring rooms, almost on his ears, and he doesn't get tired. I was already exhausted. I can't keep an eye on him anymore. I'll have to get you a vitamin complex, Daniel smiled. Because now it will always be like this. I'm so happy. Daniel had to leave Nizhny Novgorod early. Justin, on the other hand, still had to receive treatment at Rebecca's ward. Before his flight, the man stopped by his former doctor's office to thank her. However, he had no words to express his feelings. She had saved his son, and therefore his wife. This is his whole life, his happiness and destiny. How to describe it in words? Rebecca was sitting at her desk, quickly writing something. When she saw Daniel, she smiled and broke away from her urgent business. Rebecca, I don't even know what to say, Daniel said, taking a seat across from her. You saved my son, you saved all of us. I can't even find the words to describe how grateful I am. I was just doing my job, Rebecca shrugged. And then we're even. Did your father take you to the sea then? Daniel asked suddenly. Years ago, he had been very interested in that question. Rebecca wanted so much to get well soon to see the sea. Had her dream come true? Yes, Rebecca smiled warmly. It was a wonderful trip. It was the first time we went to the sea as a family. We swam, sunbathed, sat in cafes every day. My parents sold the garage to fulfill my dream. They must have been so happy that I survived that they did this impulsive thing. They're really good at what they do, Daniel said. You needed positive emotions and sea air more than any medicine at that time. So parents tried for the health of their daughter. I swam with a dolphin too, Rebecca remembered. True, not in the open sea, as in my dream, but in a dolphinarium. It must have cost my parents a lot of money. I mean, we've always been poor. But that summer after the operation, it was so happy. I felt like the whole world was spinning around me. But you deserved it, Daniel said seriously. You were a real hero. The whole staff marveled at how good you were. Not all kids have that kind of resilience. Do you remember my box? Rebecca asked. I gave it to you when you were discharged. Of course, it still holds a place of honor in my collection. It's on the shelf, and when I look at it, I think of you, that little girl, bigger than my eyes, cheerful. Do you remember what was inside it? Rebecca asked. Inside. Daniel was surprised. I didn't even think there was anything in there, Daniel said. So you didn't open it? Rebecca's eyes lit up like two torches. Surprisingly, they were gray and cold, then suddenly bright and piercing. No, I didn't, Daniel replied. Will you be sure to open it when you get home? Rebecca asked. Sure, I can't wait, Daniel admitted. And that was the truth. Daniel stood in his office. In his hands, he holds the very same box, pink, shiny, decorated with paper flowers. The lid is closed with a homemade lock. So tiny that Daniel could barely manage it with his thumbs. He could have pulled harder, of course, but he didn't want to ruin something dear to his heart. At the bottom lay a color photograph of a smiling Rebecca. It must have been a graduation photo from kindergarten. Her blonde long hair was curled and beautifully tucked to the side. Her lips were slightly touched up with pink lipstick. That day, Rebecca wore a dress of sky blue color, puffy skirt, lantern sleeves. The disease had already made itself known then. There were dark circles under the girl's eyes, but Rebecca smiled broadly at the camera, holding a bouquet of scarlet roses to her chest. It was probably her favorite picture found on her. She looked like a princess. Girls just love that kind of thing. Danielle smiled. What a sweet, cute, spontaneous little girl she was. The little girl in the picture had so much ahead of her, and severe illness, and long treatment, and victory, the sea, study, work in the hospital. But that day, of course, Rebecca didn't realize it yet. She was just a little, dressed up, beautiful and happy girl. Daniel turned the picture over as he thought. On the back was a message. Rebecca had written it years ago in her childish, clumsy handwriting. The letters jumped around, leaning in different directions. There were many reasons for that. Instead of learning and practicing her handwriting, Rebecca had to undergo long and hard medical treatment. Besides, after the operation, her fingers were still not quite right. In fact, Rebecca was a future doctor. And we all know the jokes about their handwriting. "Thank you for living," Daniel read on the back of the photo. "I was told you saved me. I will now live, go to the sea. I will have children of my own someday. And I will also definitely become a doctor. I will also save children. I promise you that. You'll see in many years you'll be proud of me." Daniel looked at the scrawled lines written by a child's hand and felt an avalanche of emotions coming over him. He had not only saved Rebecca's life, he had also determined her fate. The girl promised him that she would become a doctor, and she did. And she became a doctor. The kind of doctor one turns to when there's no hope of salvation. Ironically, he had saved little Rebecca, and now she had saved his son. And not just Justin. You can't make this stuff up. I opened the box. Daniel grabbed his phone and started typing a message to Rebecca. "I figured it out. It's amazing. I can't believe it." Rebecca responded with a long string of smiley faces and hearts. I guess she was busy again. Well, busyness was a common concern. But Daniel was sure when Rebecca got his message, she definitely smiled. A little more time passed. Justin had already recovered completely. Carolyn, lying with her son in the hospital, didn't recognize her boy. Why does he have so much energy? She wondered joyfully during phone conversations with her husband. He jumps, constantly on the move. And how many ideas he has. He is cramped in the hospital corridors in a small yard. I can't wait to be discharged. That's great, said Daniel. What does Rebecca say when you're discharged? Next week. They said they'd meet us at work. Sure enough, discharge day arrived. Daniel was told to be there at 10, but he was early on purpose. He wanted to talk to Rebecca again, ask some questions, and thank her again, of course. Now he had a healthy, energetic child, a happy, calm wife, a bright future. And it was all thanks to her, Rebecca. Daniel found out in advance what time Rebecca's meeting ended. He intended to be able to talk to her in the short time between the meeting and patient rounds. When Rebecca saw Daniel at the office, she was genuinely pleased. I knew you were coming, she said. Let's go into my office. I'll tell you how Justin's doing. I'll outline a plan of action. In fact, would you like some coffee? I'd love some. I have a box of brownies. Care to join me? Daniel nodded with a smile. They sat in Rebecca's office, drinking coffee and pastries, talking like old acquaintances. Rebecca was surprisingly easy and pleasant to talk to. Daniel immediately felt a kindred spirit. During this conversation, Rebecca told him in a very informal way how Justin was doing. Your little boy is doing great. I didn't expect this result. I thought I would need another surgery. But his body did fine, recovered. For the first couple of years, you should avoid excessive exertion. But make sure you exercise every day. Your wife's aware of that, but you should also see a cardiologist at your place of residence. Ultrasound, cardiogram. And then, after that, no restrictions. Justin will lead a perfectly normal life. It's like a miracle. Justin hasn't led a perfectly normal life since he was born. His problems were largely determined by his heart condition. It was hard to detect. Multiple pneumonias triggered the progression of the disease. That's when it all came out. So everything should be back to normal now, Daniel said. Daniel wanted to know more about Rebecca's life after the operation. How did you achieve all this? How did you become a doctor? And such a talented one at that. Usually it's the children of medical dynasties who become stars. But your parents are not from the medical field, as I recall. Far from it, Rebecca grinned. Dad's a driver, Mom's a librarian. But I had a goal. Rebecca's goal took shape as soon as she learned from her parents that she was on the brink of life and death. While the girl felt bad and could not get out of bed, her mother and father encouraged her in every possible way, assuring her that she would soon be helped. In fact, at that time, the parents had already lost all hope. They had been refused so many times by doctors, assuring them that all manipulations were useless. And then suddenly a young and brave surgeon agreed to take on. and found the operation. He did not give any prognosis, but assured that he would do everything he could. The parents had no choice. Without surgery, their girl would not survive, so they agreed to an experiment. They gave their eldest daughter at least a small but still a chance. Then, when it became clear that Rebecca was on the mend, the father told his daughter the truth. "So if it hadn't been for Uncle Daniel, I wouldn't be here?" clarified the little girl, looking seriously at the adults. "Yes, daughter," nodded the father. "He saved your life. Now I will always pray for him." "So what is it? If it wasn't for him, I'd be dead." Rebecca couldn't get her head around what she'd heard. She knew that children are born babies, then they grow up, many, many years go by, and people turn into old men and old women. And then they die, like the neighbor Baba Nura, or my dad's relative Grandpa Charlie. But that sometimes children also die. Rebecca couldn't realize that. "Are you not confusing anything?" the girl said, giving her parents a serious look. "Children, they haven't even lived yet. They need to study and give birth to their own children. They cannot die." The mother and father only shook their heads sadly. They did not want to continue this topic at all. Their daughter, their beloved Rebecca, would live now. So why talk about sad things now? But Rebecca couldn't stop thinking about the fact that children die, and very often from illness. Even on this ward where she was lying now. It had happened. The girl now knew it for sure. She asked the nurse who changed the bedding in the ward. She turned out to be talkative, so she told the curious girl the whole truth. That night, Rebecca couldn't sleep from the realization of injustice. She kept thinking about how sad and frightening it was. She could have done the same thing herself. It was her Uncle Daniel who saved her. Uncle Daniel. He's so handsome, so kind, so smart, the best. Uncle Daniel always understood her. If Rebecca wanted candy, he'd find her candy. If she wanted a soda, he'd get her a soda. He was a wizard. And now it turns out that Uncle Daniel didn't just cure her, he saved her life. Oh my gosh, Uncle Daniel, he's a good man. He's doing a great thing, saving children. Then they live and study, work, go to the sea and have babies of their own. I want to be like Uncle Daniel, Rebecca said with determination. She said this phrase out loud into the emptiness and darkness of the hospital room. From then on, Rebecca had no doubts about who she would be when she grew up. And to make sure Uncle Daniel had no doubts, she wrote him a letter on the back of a photograph. Daddy said to be thankful he told Rebecca to make a gift for Uncle Daniel. Rebecca glued a box for him. She worked very hard. She wanted the box to be perfect. The result, of course, was not quite to her liking. But it was still not bad. In the box, Rebecca put a picture of herself with a message. On the back, she had no doubt that Uncle Daniel wouldn't open the box. It hadn't even occurred to her. Boxes are meant to be opened. So Rebecca had already decided on her future profession at the age of 7. At first, her parents only smiled at her fervent declarations that she would become the best doctor in the world and cure all children. But Rebecca persistently pursued her goal. She watched medical channels, asked to buy her anatomical coloring books and books. Gradually, she began to understand the complex Latin names, learned the basics of genetics, read chemistry textbooks from the local library. And all by herself, with great enthusiasm. Rebecca found it difficult at first. Complicated terms, obscure words. But then the girl got into it. It turned out that medicine is very interesting and fascinating. And the goal, the very goal, still beckoned her, loomed before her eyes as a guiding star. The girl wanted to become like Uncle Daniel. There should be a lot of such people on Earth, so that there would be enough for all the sick children. Her parents tried to talk her out of going to medical school. You're a smart girl, of course, but there's such a competition. Lamented the mother. No enrollment, you'll have to lose a year of time somewhere. Submit documents. It's better to go to Polytechnic or to study economics. The chances are much better, my father joined in. But Rebecca stood her ground. Medicine, period. She'd been preparing for it for so long. She'd been going for it for so long. No, Rebecca couldn't change her dream. She couldn't, and she didn't want to. She did it. She got in. She got a dorm room. She plunged headfirst into her studies. With each passing year, Rebecca realized more and more clearly that she had chosen the right path. Medicine was her calling. She was a very active student, read a lot of additional literature, participated in all kinds of projects and programs. She even teamed up with students from foreign universities. Young people shared their experience, tried to solve some problems together. Rebecca's heart sang. She felt like a fish in water. Rebecca chose a different specialization than she had originally planned. She wanted to be a neurosurgeon like Uncle Daniel, but in the course of training it turned out that the girl is more attracted to cardiology. So Rebecca became a surgeon in the cardiology department. At her first operation, her heart was pounding so hard that it seemed to be heard by the whole operating room. Rebecca was worried, of course, but excited too. She was finally going to start doing what she had been striving for all her life, saving people. Time passed, Rebecca gained experience and at the same time was engaged in scientific work. The girl was interested in complex, non-standard cases. Rebecca was often brought patients who were refused by other doctors, and she nursed them back to health. She saved them, gave them a chance for a long and happy life. Grateful parents, smiling, cheerful little patients, how it all pleased the soul. Rebecca felt that she was bringing goodness, joy, and light into the world. It was not for nothing that Uncle Daniel had saved her. You see, it's a wonderful thing, Rebecca reasoned. You saved me 20 years ago, which means that if it hadn't been for you, the children I saved wouldn't have survived. It's amazing. I became a doctor. Any of your patients become teachers, engineers, drivers, and they're all doing good. They're all doing something important and good. That's how goodness spreads through the world. Daniel looked at Rebecca and smiled. He felt the same way she did.